Across deserts, mountains, islands, and forgotten valleys lie structures so old, so massive, and so carefully carved that they feel impossible for their time. Some are hidden under mountains, some cut straight from bedrock, others standing alone in landscapes where no civilization should have existed. These places whisper the same quiet question: who built all of this, and how much have we forgotten? Every chapter in this journey opens another doorway into the ancient world. Giant temples, lost fortresses, buried cities, stone monuments shaped by hands we still don't understand. Not myths, not legends, real discoveries carved into the earth, waiting thousands of years for someone to notice. The lost Egyptian copper saw blades. In the silent chambers of Egypt's oldest stone monuments, there are marks that still trouble archaeologists today. Deep inside granite boxes, on polished statues, and along the walls of ancient quarries, thin, parallel grooves run across the surface, straight, consistent, and unmistakably produced by saws. But not iron saws, not bronze. These cuts were made long before such tools existed. The Egyptians of the Old Kingdom were known to use copper tools. Copper is soft, bending easily against hard stone. Granite, by comparison, is one of the hardest natural materials used in ancient architecture. Yet the saw marks inside certain granite sarcophagi remain sharp even now, thousands of years after they were cut. The question is not whether the marks were made, the marks are there, but how the tool that made them worked so effectively. The giant granite boxes at Saqqara, Giza, and Dashur provide the clearest examples. Some of these boxes weigh tens of tons. Their interiors are smooth, with long, parallel lines carved into the surface, evidence of a straight cutting tool that moved in controlled strokes. The saw marks appear evenly spaced, suggesting a blade with an abrasive edge or a cutting agent applied to its surface. Archaeologists agree the Egyptians did not possess steel or iron blades during these early periods. Instead, they used copper, a metal far too soft to cut granite directly. To overcome this limitation, they needed a different strategy. The most widely supported explanation is that copper saws were used together with quartz sand, one of the hardest natural abrasives available to ancient craftsmen. In this method, the copper blade acted only as a guide. The sand did the real cutting. The evidence supports this idea. Ancient quarry sites show wide saw cuts too large for solid metal blades, suggesting the Egyptians used a composite tool, a flexible copper frame filled with abrasive grit. When moved back and forth, the sand ground into the stone, slowly removing material. What remains today are the long grooves produced by the guiding motion of the saw. But even with this method, the precision of some cuts seems remarkable. The grooves inside certain granite boxes are so straight, and the surfaces so controlled, that the process must have required a level of patience and technique difficult to imagine. This was not a quick operation. It was measured, steady, and likely carried out over days or weeks. In workshops discovered near pyramid complexes, archaeologists have found copper saw fragments, tubular drill bits, and grinding tools. These pieces show heavy wear, a sign that the craftsmen pressed their tools to the limit. The copper frequently needed to be reshaped, repaired, or replaced. Sand and crushed stone served as the real cutting force, and workers managed the flow of abrasive material carefully to maintain consistent cuts. The granite boxes themselves offer proof of the method's effectiveness. The interiors reflect not just sawing, but polishing phases. After the initial cut, craftsmen used grinding stones, sand, and water to smooth the surfaces. The final appearance, dark, glossy granite, shows the result of long, repetitive work carried out by skilled hands. Still, some aspects remain difficult to explain fully. Certain saw marks indicate a level of pressure and straightness that would require stable fixtures or specialized supports. The size of some cuts suggests saws several meters long, operated by multiple workers pulling in rhythm. The depth of the marks implies that these tools were capable of sustained, controlled motion across extremely hard stone. This leaves archaeologists with an incomplete but fascinating picture. The Egyptians mastered a technique that was slow but effective, combining copper, sand, water, and labor into a system capable of cutting stone far harder than the metal itself. The process required organization, experience, and a deep understanding of materials. The lost aspect of these copper saws is not that they vanished mysteriously. Rather, no complete example has survived. Copper corrodes quickly, and most ancient tools were melted down and reused long before modern excavations began. What we know comes from fragments, from experimental archaeology, and from the marks the tools left behind. Those marks are the real evidence. Inside tombs, along sarcophagi interiors, on unfinished statues, the grooves remain unchanged. Quiet signatures of a technology that relied more on technique than on strength. Walking through the stone corridors of Egypt's older monuments today, the grooves look almost modern. Visitors often assume the marks were made recently, or with tools far more advanced than copper. But they are ancient, cut by craftsmen whose understanding of stonework ran deeper than we often imagine. The mystery is not supernatural, nor does it point to lost civilizations. It points to skill, painstaking, repetitive, disciplined skill carried out by people who learned how to use the natural resources around them in ways that still surprise us. The lost Egyptian copper saw blades remind us that ancient engineering was not defined by the tools available, but by the ingenuity of those who used them. Soft metal, hard stone, and the patience to work until the impossible became routine. And in the granite boxes, where straight lines still run across the surfaces after 4,000 years, the legacy of that technique is written clearly in stone. The Cairo solar boat of Khufu. In 1954, on the south side of the Great Pyramid of Giza, workers clearing windblown sand uncovered a long, narrow pit sealed with massive limestone slabs. The blocks fit tightly, forming a kind of stone lid over something hidden for more than 4,000 years. When the final slab was lifted, the excavation team looked down into a space filled not with a single artifact, but with more than 1,000 carefully arranged wooden pieces. Buried deep beside the Pyramid of Khufu was a full-sized cedar ship perfectly preserved, waiting for the world to rediscover it. Today, it is known as the Cairo Solar Boat, or simply Khufu's boat. Nearly 44 meters long, built from imported Lebanese cedar, and shaped for the river rather than the sea, it is one of the most complete ancient ships ever found. Its survival is both surprising and deliberate. The Egyptians constructed it, disassembled it, placed it in the pit, and sealed it with precision, intending it to remain untouched for eternity. The ship's purpose has long been a subject of study. It was not built for battle, trade, or daily travel. Instead, it belonged to a world of ritual, a vessel meant to accompany the king in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed the sun god traveled across the sky by boat, sailing from dawn to dusk, and then through the underworld at night. Khufu, as a divine ruler, required his own vessel to make that same journey after death. The boat beside his pyramid was part of that belief. A solar barque, crafted to carry the king along the celestial river. The careful arrangement of the pieces in the burial pit tells its own story. The planks were stacked in logical order, each one marked with symbols that indicated its position. This allowed modern archaeologists to reassemble the vessel almost exactly as it had been built. It was likely taken apart for burial, but originally existed as a complete, functional craft. The ropes, wooden, pegs, and mortise and tenon joints show it was capable of floating on water, even if its primary function was symbolic. When fully reconstructed, the boat reveals a remarkable level of craftsmanship. The hull curves smoothly from bow to stern. The planks fit together without metal nails, relying instead on wooden dowels and tight joinery. The ship's papyrus-shaped prow and stern rise elegantly, echoing the form of traditional Nile boats. Inside, crossbeams support the long body, and lashings of ancient rope still hold parts of the structure together, a rare survival considering the age of the ship. The cedar used to build the vessel came from the Levant, hundreds of kilometers from Egypt. This indicates not only the value of the ship, but also the network of trade and diplomacy during Khufu's reign. Cedar was prized for its strength, durability, and resistance to insects qualities, essential for building ships capable of lasting beyond a king's lifetime. Inside the pit, archaeologists found no sails, paddles, or equipment that would indicate daily use. Instead, the form of the vessel itself suggests a ceremonial boat. Its shape matches the solar barques shown in Old Kingdom temple reliefs, long, graceful vessels carrying the sun god across the heavens. In these depictions, the gods and the deceased king travel side by side. Khufu's boat was the physical expression of that idea. The location of the burial pit reinforces its purpose. Placed alongside the pyramid rather than inside it, the boat's pit remained connected to the open sky. In Egyptian belief, the north and south sides of pyramids held symbolic meaning. The south side, where the boat was found, was linked to the sun's course and the rebirth of the king in the afterlife. The sealed pit formed a controlled environment, protecting the wood from decay and allowing the boat to remain intact long after the builders themselves were gone. For decades, the boat remained untouched while experts decided how to preserve it. Eventually, restoration began. Each piece was lifted, documented, and treated. The reassembly process took years. When the boat finally rose into its reconstructed form, it revealed an object both ancient and unexpectedly familiar, not a relic of distant myth, but a real vessel, shaped by real hands. Standing beside the reconstructed ship today, the scale becomes clear. It is long enough to span a modern building, tall enough to overshadow visitors, and shaped with lines that feel almost modern in their efficiency. Yet every detail reflects a world built on ritual. The absence of a mast and sail, the ornamental prow, and the symbolic elements incorporated into the design all point toward a vessel intended for a journey that was spiritual rather than physical. The second boat pit discovered nearby remains sealed, its contents still hidden. Some believe it contains another ship, possibly a companion vessel. This suggests that Khufu's funerary complex originally included an entire fleet of symbolic boats, each with a specific function in the rituals of death and rebirth. What makes the Cairo solar boat extraordinary is not only its preservation but the insight it offers into the mind of Old Kingdom Egypt. It shows a society capable of organizing labor, importing material, engineering large structures, and constructing precision joinery long before iron tools existed. It reflects a belief system where objects played active roles in the afterlife, bridging the physical and the divine. Even after thousands of years, the wood retains the slight scent of cedar when warmed by light. The ropes remain twisted in their original patterns. The joints show the marks of ancient blades. These details bring a sense of presence, a reminder that the vessel was not imagined, but built. It existed first in the world of the living before being transferred into the realm of the dead. The Cairo solar boat of Khufu stands today as one of the clearest examples of ancient Egyptian thought made physical. It is both a masterpiece of carpentry and a sacred object, crafted with the expectation that it would never be used by human hands again. A full-size ship, sealed in darkness beside a pyramid, waiting millennia before its purpose could be examined. A vessel for a king's eternal journey resting quietly until time finally revealed it. The ancient Egyptian prosthetic toes. In a small, climate-controlled room in the Egyptian Museum, an object rests quietly behind glass. It is not gold, not carved stone, not a royal emblem. It is a toe, a carefully shaped prosthetic made of wood, leather, and fiber. At first glance, it seems almost too ordinary to belong among Egypt's monumental artifacts. But this small object represents one of the oldest known examples of functional prosthetics in human history, and what makes it remarkable is simple. It worked. The artifact comes from a burial in the Theban necropolis, identified as the mummy of a woman who lived more than 3,000 years ago. During examination of the body, researchers noticed something unusual. The woman was missing part of her right big toe. In its place was a crafted replacement, a wooden prosthetic, shaped with intention, tied to the foot with fiber straps. This was not ceremonial. It was not decorative. It was designed to be used in daily life. 2 prosthetic toes have been found in Egypt, but one stands out as especially advanced. The more famous example, often called the Cairo toe or Greville Chester toe, shows signs of engineering rarely expected from the ancient world. The wooden portion is curved to match natural movement. The underside is sculpted to absorb pressure. Holes drilled through the sides allowed leather straps to keep it firmly attached. The prosthetic was not merely a placeholder. It provided balance and helped the user walk. To understand why this mattered, it's important to consider how vital the big toe is for human movement. It bears weight, stabilizes the foot, and controls push-off during each step. Losing it affects balance and mobility. The fact that the Egyptian craftsmen understood this and attempted to restore that function shows a level of anatomical awareness far ahead of its time. Testing of the prosthetic in modern replicas reveals something striking. When worn, the wooden toe makes walking smoother for someone missing the natural toe. It reduces pressure on the remaining foot, helps maintain posture, and even provides comfort. This suggests the object was tailored to the woman who wore it. Someone studied her foot, measured her stride, and shaped the replacement accordingly. The materials reflect both practicality and cultural context. Wood was abundant and workable. Leather straps allowed flexibility and adjustment. The shape mirrors other wooden objects of the New Kingdom, precise, polished, and carefully joined. There is no indication the toe was intended as a symbolic object for burial alone. Evidence of wear, rubbing, and small repairs suggest it was used during life. The woman found with the prosthetic lived in a period when Egyptian medicine was both practical and spiritual. Medical papyri describe diagnoses, herbal treatments, and surgical procedures, mixed with spells and prayers. But what the prosthetic toe reveals is something quieter, a concern for mobility, comfort, and the daily needs of an individual. The burial shows that she belonged to a reasonably wealthy or respected family. Her wrappings were careful, her grave goods modest but meaningful. The presence of the prosthetic toe indicates that her well-being mattered to someone enough to craft a device rare, even among Egyptian finds. This small object becomes a human story, a reminder that ancient life included injuries, healing, and the desire for normality. Archaeologists examining the toe often remark on its fit. The curvature aligns with natural toe orientation. The base is shaped to sit securely against the foot. The craftsmanship is practical rather than ornate. The emphasis was on function. Tool marks on the wood show deliberate shaping and smoothing, likely adjusted multiple times until it worked properly. The find also fits into a broader context of Egyptian skill with materials. Woodworkers produced furniture with tight joints. Shipbuilders created large vessels using elaborate mortise and tenon construction, and artisans carved statues with precise proportions. The prosthetic toe draws from that same tradition of technical understanding, scaled down to meet a personal need. The existence of such prosthetics raises broader questions. Were these objects more common than we found? Did they exist for fingers, limbs, or other injuries? Wood, leather, and fiber decay quickly, so what survives may not represent the full range of ancient medical devices. The prosthetic toe may be exceptional because it survived, not because it was unique. Yet even if others once existed, this one remains a rare example of a medical solution created through direct engineering. It reflects a combination of anatomical awareness, practical craftsmanship, and social care. A small object, but one that required knowledge, intention, and compassion. Today, the prosthetic toe continues to draw attention not for its size, but for what it symbolizes. It connects modern viewers to the lived realities of ancient Egyptians, revealing their ingenuity and their understanding of the human body. It shows that disability was addressed, that comfort mattered, that people with injuries were supported. In a world dominated by monumental pyramids, colossal statues, and grand temples, this toe offers a different perspective, one rooted in everyday experience. It is not a royal artifact. It is not a symbol of cosmic order. It is a human solution to a human problem. The ancient Egyptian prosthetic toes remain among the oldest functioning prosthetics ever discovered. They show us that long before modern medicine, ancient craftsmen could create devices that genuinely improved lives. A small wooden toe, hidden for millennia, now stands as a reminder that the ancient world was not only grand, it was deeply human. The Nilometer water technology. Long before Egypt built its pyramids or carved its colossal statues, the Nile River shaped every season of life. Its annual flood determined harvests, stability, and survival. And for thousands of years, the Egyptians used an elegant, machine-like structure to measure that flood with remarkable precision. This device did not look like a machine. It had no gears, chains, or metal instruments. Yet, it performed one of the most important scientific tasks in the ancient world. It was called the Nilometer. The Nilometer was a simple concept executed with mathematical clarity. A vertical well or corridor connected directly to the Nile, marked with depth measurements along its stone walls. As the river rose and fell, the water level inside the Nilometer rose and fell with it. By reading the markings, officials knew not just how much water would flow across the fields, but how much grain the kingdom could expect, and therefore how much tax should be collected. This was more than observation. It was predictive science. The oldest known Nilometers date to the Old Kingdom, and the most famous example stands on Elephantine Island in Aswan. Carved into the riverbank, the structure descends in a long staircase. Each step is marked, each surface smoothed for accuracy. When water entered through underground channels, priests measured its height, the clarity of the water, and the speed of its rise. A high flood meant rich farmland and prosperity. A low flood meant drought, famine, and social instability, and the Nilometer was the tool that detected these outcomes before they happened. The Elephantine Nilometer, used for centuries, includes inscriptions showing its repair and recalibration across different eras. Even the Romans maintained it long after Egyptian pharaohs were gone, recognizing its practical value. The structure is striking in its simplicity. A long shaft cut into the rock, 20 or more meters deep, with staircases, allowing priests to descend safely. At the bottom, a channel fed water directly from the Nile. Archaeologists studying the marks have found the units of measurement used by ancient Egyptians. The cubit and its subdivisions, cut precisely into the stone. The accuracy of these marks reflects an understanding of hydrology that rivals early scientific instruments. But the Nilometer was more than a tool. It was also a sacred object. Priests of the Nile god, Hapi, performed rituals here, offering thanks for the rising water. The flood was not just a natural event. It was a divine blessing. Measuring it was both an act of administration and an act of religion. Even as officials calculated tax rates, priests interpreted the water's rise as a sign of cosmic balance. Inside the Nilometer's cool stone walls, the waterline created a direct connection between human activity and the forces of nature. Over centuries, measurements were recorded, compared, and used to guide policy. The Nilometer became a center of knowledge, a place where observation shaped decisions across the kingdom. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Nilometer is its hybrid identity. It resembles a scientific instrument, a religious site, a fiscal tool, and a hydraulic structure all at once. This combination shows how tightly woven Egypt's social systems were. The king's power, the stability of the state, and the faith of the people all relied on a good flood, and the Nilometer was the point where these elements intersected. Other Nilometers appear across Egypt on the island of Rhoda in Cairo, beside temples in Upper Egypt, and near administrative centers. Each reflects the same basic design: channels, stairways, marks, and protected enclosures. They were built in stone, not only for durability, but to maintain consistent measurements year after year. Erosion could have altered readings, so great care was taken to preserve accuracy. Over time, the Nilometer's readings became so embedded in governance that entire calendars were shaped around them. The inundation season Aket was recognized by the rise in the well. Ceremonies welcomed the flood. Farmers prepared their tools. Scribes calculated how much grain would fill the storehouses. Inside the Elephantine Nilometer, the water often rose silently, filling the deep shaft long before the river overflowed onto the fields. This allowed officials to act early, giving the Nilometer a predictive quality. The structure, simple as it was, offered a glimpse into the coming season. Visitors today often miss this subtlety. The Nilometer looks like a staircase descending into a stone. Well, interesting, but not dramatic. Yet the marks on the walls, worn but visible, represent the heartbeat of a civilization. They are more than measurements. They are records of environmental patterns across centuries. The Nilometer embodies the quiet intelligence of ancient Egypt. It shows how observation guided governance, how technology blended with religion, and how engineering solutions supported an entire society. There was no need for metal machines, no complex moving parts, just a deep understanding of water and stone. Standing at the bottom of a Nilometer today, the light above seems distant, the air cool, the stone walls echoing faintly. The place feels both scientific and sacred, a chamber where numbers once guided, rituals guided policy. It is a reminder that knowledge in the ancient world was never separate from belief. The Nilometer water technology stands as one of Egypt's most understated achievements. It lacks the grandeur of pyramids or temples, but it represents something equally profound: the ability to read nature, record it, and act upon it with precision. A staircase, a shaft, and a rising line of water forming a machine built from stone, designed to measure the river that sustained a civilization for millennia. The Meidum geopolymer blocks, south of modern Cairo, rising alone in the desert, stands the Meidum Pyramid, a structure that looks unfinished. Its sides collapsed long ago, leaving a strange stepped core surrounded by rubble. At first glance, the ruins don't seem unusual, but for archaeologists studying the outer casing blocks that once covered the pyramid, Meidum holds one of the more debated mysteries in Old Kingdom construction. Some of the surviving blocks show unusual textures, bonding patterns, and internal structures that differ from traditional quarried limestone. These blocks, dense, uniform, and in some cases smoother than expected, have led researchers to consider a possibility rarely discussed in older Egyptology, that certain pyramid blocks may have been cast, not carved. This idea does not propose advanced lost technology. It does not claim modern concrete existed in ancient Egypt, but it suggests that some builders at Mitam may have experimented with what we now call geopolymer-like mixtures, reconstituted limestone, created by dissolving soft rock with natural chemicals, then rehardening it in molds. The Mitam pyramid provides some of the clearest examples. The casing blocks found at the base show surprisingly sharp edges, consistent densities, and a lack of natural fossil patterns normally found in quarry limestone. When broken, some pieces reveal a fine-grained matrix that appears poured rather than naturally layered. In trenches near the pyramid, workers discovered areas where limestone nodules, clay, ash, and water could have been mixed into a slurry-like compound. None of this proves definitively that the blocks were cast, but the physical characteristics raise questions that the usual explanations do not address fully. The oldest parts of Mitam date to the 4th dynasty, during the reign of Sneferu. This was a period of extensive building experimentation. The Bent Pyramid, Red Pyramid, and Mitam all belong to this same phase when architects shifted designs, changed angles, and tested new materials on a scale unmatched in earlier periods. It is within this environment of experimentation that the geopolymer hypothesis becomes plausible. Soft limestone, when mixed with naturally occurring minerals like natron and ash, can break down into a clay-like paste. When poured into wooden molds and left to dry under desert heat, it hardens into a material very similar to quarried limestone but smoother and more uniform. If the builders at Mitam used this technique even for a portion of the casing blocks, it would explain several unusual features. Blocks with nearly identical shapes, tight joints fitting with minimal gaps, internal structures lacking natural fossil variation, smoother surfaces than expected from hand-carving, absence of chisel marks on some faces. These clues have pushed some researchers to test reconstituted limestone mixtures experimentally. The results are compelling. Geopolymer-style blocks, when made with local Egyptian materials, match the density and appearance of certain Mitam casing stones almost exactly. However, the theory remains debated. Many Egyptologists maintain the traditional view that all blocks were carved from quarries and transported to the site, and there is strong evidence for quarrying practices during Sneferu's time. But the Mitam casing blocks stand apart. The pyramid itself adds to the mystery. Its collapse in antiquity exposed inner layers that would otherwise remain hidden. Some stones inside the rubble appear different from the casing blocks, more porous, more naturally stratified. This strengthens the argument that only some blocks may have been cast, perhaps for corners or high-precision sections. The collapsed outer layer also provides access to broken fragments for modern analysis. Microscopic examinations show binding patterns and microstructures atypical of natural limestone, though not definitively artificial. The debate continues, but the physical signs cannot be ignored. Standing at Mitam today, the desert wind blows across piles of fallen casing blocks. Many still show sharp geometric forms despite thousands of years of exposure. Their surfaces are smoother than stones typically shaped by copper tools. Some blocks appear as though they were lifted straight from a mold, crisp edges, uniform faces, and surfaces lacking the irregularities of quarry rock. This does not diminish the skill of Egyptian builders. If anything, it highlights their adaptability. Whether the Mitam blocks were cast or carved, the achievement remains extraordinary. Moving these massive stones, shaping them, and arranging them in precise layers required knowledge, organization, and labor on an immense scale. The geopolymer theory simply adds another dimension to their ingenuity, a possibility that ancient builders experimented with materials in ways not fully understood today. The Mitam pyramid, often overshadowed by the monuments at Giza, reveals something essential about Egyptian construction. Innovation was constant. Techniques were developed, tested, and sometimes abandoned. The smooth casing blocks at Mitam may be evidence of one such experiment, a method that blended chemistry, environment, and craftsmanship. In the end, the question remains open. No written text describes casting methods. No mold has survived, and yet the stone itself presents clues that challenge simple explanations. The Midam geopolymer blocks stand as a reminder that ancient construction did not rely on a single technique. The Egyptians were practical. They used what worked. And sometimes, what worked leaves behind marks that feel strangely modern. Among the fallen stones of Midam, the quiet mystery continues, a puzzle written in limestone, waiting for future research to read it more clearly. The stone alignment tools, Merkit plus Bay. In the long history of Egyptian engineering, certain achievements stand out immediately: pyramids aligned to the cardinal points, temples oriented to solstice light, and structures whose precision still feels difficult to explain. But hidden behind these monumental works are the tools that made them possible. Long before compasses, metal levels, or optical instruments existed, Egyptians used two simple devices, the Merkit and the Bay. Together, they formed one of the earliest known astronomical sighting systems, instruments used to track stars, find true north, and lay out the foundations of temples and pyramids with surprising accuracy. The Merkit was a small tool, shaped like a plumb line attached to a wooden handle. The Bay was a straight-notched sighting stick. Used together, they allowed an observer to align buildings with the sky. Nothing about these tools looks advanced to the modern eye. There is no metal framework, no lenses, no gears, but in the hands of trained astronomer priests, they became instruments capable of producing alignments within fractions of a degree. Egyptian architecture makes this clear. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is aligned to true north with astonishing precision, deviating by only a small fraction of a degree. Many temples at Karnak, Luxor, Abydos are oriented toward specific celestial events, including the rising of particular stars or the path of the sun on certain days. These alignments were not accidents, nor were they symbolic gestures. They were deliberate choices, made using simple tools and repeated observation. The Merkit and Bay system relied on the night sky. Egyptian astronomer priests stood under the stars, sighting through the Bay while holding the Merkit's plumb line steady. The key was the fixed stars near the celestial pole. By marking where these stars rose and set, the priests could find a true north-south line. The procedure required patience and repetition, but the results were precise enough to guide massive construction projects. This method created a reference line across the ground, from which other measurements could be taken. Once the north-south axis was established, the east-west axis could be set at right angles. With these lines laid out, builders placed foundations, ensuring that the rising sun, solstice light, or star paths would align perfectly with corridors, doorways, or courtyards. The simplicity of the tools allowed for durability. A Merkit could be made quickly, replaced easily, and carried anywhere. The Bay, carved from wood or sometimes metal, served both as a sighting instrument and a measuring stick. Together, they formed a portable observational kit for ancient surveyors, a quiet expression of the practical astronomy that shaped Egypt's built environment. The instruments themselves rarely survive. Wood and string decay quickly in Egypt's climate compared to stone. But inscriptions, reliefs, and tomb scenes show Merkits in use, often held by priests standing before the stars. The Bay appears in similar scenes, marked with notches for sighting and alignment. Archaeological finds include plumb bobs, string weights, and sighting rods, simple tools that collectively formed an early scientific system. The alignment process was not limited to construction. Nilometer readings, agricultural planning, and temple rituals all depended on accurate astronomical observation. In a world without clocks, the night sky served as both a calendar and a compass. The Merkit and Bay helped translate that celestial map into physical structure. One of the most striking applications appears in temples that frame specific star events. At Karnak, shafts of sunlight enter the sanctuary on certain days of the year, a design made possible through astronomical planning. At Dendera, inscriptions describe observations of star risings used to determine ritual calendars. The tools themselves appear in these texts as essential instruments of the priestly profession. The tools also reflect the Egyptians' approach to knowledge. Their science was not separated from religion. Observation was a sacred duty, and precision was a form of devotion. Aligning a temple correctly was not only a technical achievement, it was a way of ensuring harmony between the human world and the divine. The Merkit and Bay allowed priests to read the sky, interpret it, and embed its patterns into stone. Standing at an ancient construction site today, the distances involved feel overwhelming. The idea that simple plumb lines and rods could determine the placement of massive blocks may seem improbable, but experimental archaeology has shown that the method works. When the Merket and Bay system is used under clear night skies, it produces alignments comparable to those found in Old Kingdom structures. This does not mean the tools were magical or mysterious. Their effectiveness came from familiarity with the sky, a deep understanding of patterns repeated year after year. Egyptian priests observed stars with discipline, often working in pairs or groups to confirm measurements. The instruments were part of a larger system of training and tradition knowledge, passed from one generation to the next. The real mystery is how consistent the results were over centuries. Pyramids, mastabas, and temples, built generations apart, often share the same astronomical alignment. This continuity suggests an institutional memory of observational methods, a scientific tradition maintained within the priesthood. The Merket and Bay also remind us that scientific progress is not always about new tools. Sometimes it is about using simple tools with extraordinary skill. The Egyptians transformed wood, string, and patience into an observational science capable of shaping stone landscapes. Today, seeing these instruments displayed in museums, they appear modest. The Merket hangs like a small pendulum. The Bay resembles an ordinary rod. Yet the monuments aligned with their help remain among the most precisely oriented ancient structures on Earth. The stone alignment tools of Egypt, the Merket and Bay, show us that behind every massive block and towering wall was a moment of quiet human observation, a star rising, a plumb line falling straight, a rod held still against the sky. Simple acts that produced architectural results still admired today. In their simplicity lies their power. And in the monuments they helped align, their legacy continues in silence. The Egyptian water clock, clepsydra. In the dim light of ancient Egyptian temples, time did not pass with the ticking of gears or the swing of metal pendulums. It flowed quietly, steadily through a carved stone vessel filled with water. This device, simple in form but sophisticated in purpose, was the Egyptian water clock, the clepsydra, a tool designed to measure hours long before mechanical clocks existed. The earliest known Egyptian clepsydras date to the New Kingdom, though the concepts behind them are older. The most famous example comes from Karnak, discovered in fragments and reconstructed into a stone bowl with sloping sides and carefully incised markings. To the untrained eye, it looks like a ritual basin, but to priests responsible for the temple's nightly observances, it was a precision instrument. The clepsydra worked through controlled water loss. Inside the vessel, water drained through a small opening near the base. As the level dropped, it passed a series of carved lines that represented hours of the night. The shape of the bowl was crucial, wider at the top, narrower toward the bottom, so each hour line corresponded to an equal amount of time, even though the water level changed unevenly. This required calculations, experimentation, and an understanding of how water flowed under different pressures. It was, in its own way, a form of engineering. Priests used the water clock to time rituals performed through the night. In Egyptian belief, the sun god traveled through the underworld after sunset, and the king's rituals helped ensure his safe passage. These ceremonies required precise timing. Certain prayers had to be recited at exact intervals. Music, incense, and torchlight were coordinated with astronomical observations. The clepsydra gave structure to this nightly rhythm. It measured hours when sundials were useless. The markings inside the vessel reflect this purpose. They are not decorations, they are measurements, often labeled with hieroglyphs indicating specific hours of the night. Some clepsydras include markings that adjusted for seasonal changes. In Egypt, nights were longer in winter and shorter in summer, so the intervals were recalibrated accordingly. This means the tool was not static, it adapted to the astronomical environment. The clepsydra from Karnak, attributed to a high priest named Amenhotep, is one of the finest surviving examples. Its inscriptions include star names and month names, linking the water clock directly to celestial observation. This connection reveals an essential truth. Egyptian timekeeping was inseparable from astronomy. The clepsydra was not simply a timer. It was part of a larger system that tracked stars, seasons, and religious obligations. Physically, the clock was carved from stone, often alabaster or limestone, chosen for its durability and smoothness. The interior surface was polished to control the flow of water. The hole at the base was drilled, with precision. Too wide, and the water would drain too fast. Too narrow, and it would stop flowing. Maintaining that opening required careful monitoring, especially in Egypt's environment, where mineral deposits could gradually build up. The water clock also played a role outside temples. In administrative centers, it regulated schedules, coordinated watch shifts, and allowed officials to track the passing of hours during the night. Some texts refer to time watchers, officials whose duty was to monitor the clepsydra and announce each hour. This created a structured understanding of time that influenced agriculture, trade, and the organization of labor. Yet for all its practicality, the water clock still carries a sense of mystery. Standing before it today, the carved interior lines appear ancient and worn. The concept feels both familiar and distant. There is something quiet about its function time measured not by sound or motion, but by water silently lowering itself, inside stone. The Egyptians did not measure time the way we do. For them, hours were not fixed lengths but flexible divisions of daylight and night. The clepsydra reflects this fluid approach. Its interior markings changed with seasons because the meaning of an hour changed with seasons. Time, in the Egyptian worldview, was not mechanical, it was cosmological. This perspective shaped how clepsydras were used. Priests timed rituals not by numerical precision but by harmony with cosmic cycles. The water clock helped maintain that harmony. Its readings were tied to star risings, temple alignments, and seasonal festivals. In this sense, the clepsydra was less a machine and more a mediator between human activity and the movement of the sky. Archaeologists and experimental researchers have reconstructed working clepsydras using ancient measurements. These replicas show that the Egyptians achieved surprising accuracy within minutes over several hours. The consistency of the outflow demonstrates how carefully the original designers shaped the vessel. A single miscalculated curve inside would distort the timing. The real ingenuity lies in the combination of simplicity and purpose. No gears, no metal, no weights, just gravity, water, and stone. Yet from this, the Egyptians created a reliable system of nocturnal timekeeping that lasted for centuries. Visitors today sometimes overlook the clepsydra in museum displays. It sits quietly, overshadowed by statues, sarcophagi, and golden artifacts. But its importance is immense. Without such tools, aligning temples, timing rituals, and coordinating large-scale projects would have been far harder. It is one of Egypt's earliest scientific instruments, practical, precise, and deeply connected to the natural world. The Egyptian water clock shows us that technology in the ancient world did not always look like metal or machinery. Sometimes it looked like a carved stone bowl filled with water, counting the hours as silently as the desert night. A tool, shaped with intention, linking human time to cosmic time, marking the hours of rituals long since forgotten, yet still echoing faintly through the measurements etched inside its walls. The Old Kingdom rope-making machines. In the shadow of Egypt's earliest pyramids, where massive stone blocks still sit in precise formation, another technology lies mostly unseen. It is not carved in relief, not preserved in grand temples, and rarely mentioned outside specialist research. Yet without it, the Old Kingdom's vast construction projects would have been impossible. This technology was the rope-making machine, a set of simple wooden devices used to twist plant fibers into strong, reliable ropes capable of hauling multi-ton stones. The pyramids may be the most visible achievements of the Old Kingdom, but the machines that made rope were the quiet force behind the work. Egyptian rope was not an ordinary product. It was a critical engineering material. Hauling, lifting, binding sledges, acting as tension elements in levers, moving colossi, securing boats. All of these depended on rope, strong enough to withstand immense strain. The Old Kingdom builders used millions of meters of rope, replaced constantly as fibers wore down under heavy use. Archaeological evidence for rope-making comes from fragments of machines, preserved ropes, relief scenes, and the ropes themselves found in desert quarries and burial shafts. The machines were simple but effective. Wooden frames, turning spindles, weighted stones, and tension crooks that allowed fibers to twist together evenly. When used correctly, these tools produced ropes as thick as a man's arm, uniform in tension and strength. The primary material was papyrus, palm fiber, and halfa grass plants abundant along the Nile. Workers harvested fiber bundles, dried them, soaked them, and divided them into strands. Using rope-making devices, They twisted the strands together, then combined those twisted bundles into thicker cords using counter-rotation techniques. The result was a rope that did not unravel, even under extreme stress. Scenes from the Tomb of Copper at Saqqara show workers using turning devices to twist rope, pulling long strands across the ground while maintaining tension. Wooden rope-making tools have been found at Cahoon and other sites, showing spindles carved with precision to ensure even twisting. These devices were not advanced machines, but they transformed raw plant fiber into engineered material. What makes the Old Kingdom rope-making process fascinating is its scale. The amount of rope required for pyramid building was enormous. For moving a single multi-ton block, several long ropes were needed, each one dozens of meters long. For constructing an entire pyramid, tens of thousands of blocks required coordinated hauling, meaning continuous production of strong, fresh rope. Excavations at Wadi al-Jarf, the port used during Khufu's reign, revealed coils of ancient rope still preserved in dry conditions. These ropes, made of palm fiber, show complex twisting patterns identical to those found in rope-making machines of later periods. Their thickness, strength, and uniformity demonstrate a high level of craftsmanship. One of the clearest examples of rope engineering appears in the Great Pyramid's boat pits. The ropes used to lash Khufu's solar boat together were made with precision, their twist consistent from end to end. These ropes held cedar planks in structural tension, a method that required predictable strength, not guesswork. The rope-making machines made such reliability possible. The machines themselves were straightforward. A fixed post or wooden forked frame anchored one end of the fibers. A turning handle or spindle was used to twist them. Workers walked backward as the strands tightened, controlling the tension with practiced movements. Weighted stones or clay pieces kept the twist even. When the first twist was complete, multiple twisted strands were then counter-twisted together to form a rope. This counter-rotation technique prevented unraveling and increased strength, a principle still used in modern rope manufacturing. The Old Kingdom engineers understood these mechanics deeply, even if they expressed them in practical rather than theoretical terms. Their ropes did not snap easily because the method of twisting distributed stress across all fibers. Surviving ropes show this clearly. Under magnification, researchers can see uniform rotations along their length. In some cases, reinforcing knots appear at intervals, an early technique to limit fraying. The presence of these patterns shows careful planning, not improvisation. Rope-making workshops likely operated continuously near major construction sites. Evidence from Cahoon and Giza includes fiber waste, broken spindles, and rope scrap. These workshops produced both hauling ropes and finer cords used for measuring, tensioning, and guiding cuts in stone. A remarkable detail appears in the alignment of the pyramids themselves. The Old Kingdom surveyors used stretching of the cord ceremonies to lay out straight lines and right angles. The cord used for these rituals was not symbolic, it was a precision-crafted rope whose length and stretch characteristics were known to the builders. A rope that stretched unevenly would distort the plan. A rope made with the rope-making machines delivered consistent tension, allowing the surveyors to trust its accuracy. This connection between rope-making and architectural precision is often overlooked, but without reliable rope, the entire construction process, from quarry to foundation, would have faltered. Even in the desert today, fragments of rope remain in some shafts and collapsed structures. Their fibers are dry, brittle, but still recognizable. They speak to a world of constant production, where teams of craftsmen twisted plant fibers night and day to keep up with construction demands. The mystery surrounding the rope-making machines is not about lost technology. Their principles are clear, simple, and demonstrable. The mystery lies in the scale of organization, a system where thousands of workers depended on the constant output of these simple devices. The machines themselves did not move giant blocks, but they created the material that made movement possible. Standing at the base of the pyramids today, the massive stones face the sun silently. But behind the scenes of those stones is a quieter achievement: the ropes that pulled them, the machines that twisted them, and the craftsmen whose work rarely appears in the grand narratives of Egypt. The Old Kingdom rope-making machines may not survive in full form, but the ropes they created still tell their story. An ancient technology, simple yet essential, that allowed human hands to move mountains. The magical, medical papyrus. When people imagine ancient Egyptian medicine, they often picture amulets, incense, and prayers whispered in dimly lit rooms. Those elements were real. But alongside them existed something far more structured, a medical tradition written down in long scrolls, recorded like a handbook. One of the most famous of these is a 3,000-year-old manuscript known today as the Ebers Papyrus. To the eyes of modern researchers, this papyrus feels almost impossible for its time. It includes diagnoses, treatment steps, surgical notes, and detailed descriptions of symptoms. It reads not as legend, but as early clinical science. The Ebers Papyrus dates to around 1550 BCE, during the New Kingdom, though it likely contains knowledge much older. Written on a scroll more than 20 meters long, the document combines medical observation with ritual practice. It is magical, not because its contents are imaginary, but because it blends science and belief so seamlessly that one cannot separate them. Egyptian healers saw the body as a system of fluid pathways, channels that could become blocked, irritated, or infected. Their descriptions resemble early attempts to map circulation and organ function. In treating illnesses, they used both physical remedies and spoken incantations, believing that the mind, spirit, and body needed to work together for healing to occur. The papyrus opens with instructions for treating infections, wounds, and inflammation. It describes ways to clean injuries, apply dressings, and reduce swelling. Some remedies involve honey, which we now know has antibacterial properties. Others use plant-based salves, oils, or mineral ointments. The structure is methodical. Identify the symptom, suggest the cause, then provide treatment. One section focuses on fractures and dislocations. The steps mirror what modern first responders recognize: set the bone, stabilize it, bind it, and keep the limb as still as possible. These are not mystical solutions. They are practical surgical instructions. Another portion deals with digestive disorders. The papyrus lists symptoms such as abdominal pain, bloating, constipation, and parasites, then outlines treatments using herbs, resins, and mixtures designed to soothe or purge the system. Many of these ingredients appear in Egyptian medicine for centuries afterward. But the papyrus is not purely medical. Interwoven with its remedies are incantations, spells, and ritual phrases. In the Egyptian worldview, illness had multiple origins: physical, spiritual, and environmental. A successful treatment addressed all three. Thus, the text includes instructions for calming the patient, invoking deities associated with healing, and restoring balance to the body's internal channels. For modern readers, this mixture may seem contradictory. For ancient Egyptians, it was a complete system. The structure of the papyrus shows an advanced understanding of documentation. Sections are organized by ailment: skin problems, dental pain, respiratory issues, childbirth complications, and even mental disturbances. Some pages describe symptoms that resemble depression or anxiety. Treatments recommended soothing ointments, aromatic oils, and comforting rituals, an early recognition of emotional health. One of the most remarkable features is the papyrus's approach to observation. The writers note the appearance of wounds, the color of secretions, the smell of infections, and the changes in a patient's behavior. These details show a diagnostic mindset, careful attention to cause and effect, not simple superstition. The papyrus also preserves knowledge from earlier traditions. Some remedies date to the Old Kingdom. Others appear influenced by Nubian or Levantine practices. The scroll acts as a collection of centuries of experience, passed through priest-physicians, who served in temples dedicated to healing gods like Hathor and Sekhmet. The practicality of the text becomes especially clear when examining its prescriptions. It lists measurements, preparation steps, and application methods. Some remedies required grinding ingredients on stone pallets, mixing them with water or wine, and applying them with linen bandages. These details suggest the existence of organized medical training apprentices, learning directly from experienced healers. Yet the papyrus also leaves behind unanswered questions. How were these healers trained? Who wrote and updated the manuscript? Did every physician follow its guidelines, or was it a personal reference for a specific priest? The document's survival was itself a matter of chance. Hidden for millennia in the dry climate of Upper Egypt, the papyrus remained intact until the 19th century, when it was sold to a European collector. Since then, scholars have slowly translated and analyzed its contents, revealing the sophistication of Egyptian medical thought. Today, the papyrus is often displayed under glass, flattened and fragile. Its lines of hieratic script run neatly across the surface, with occasional corrections and marginal notes, signs of careful editing. Standing before it, visitors sometimes expect to encounter mystical recipes, but what they find instead is a blend of observation and ritual that feels surprisingly grounded. The magical label can be misleading. The Egyptians did not draw a line between physical and spiritual treatment. Both were necessary. A wound might require honey and bandages, but also words of protection. A stomach illness might need herbs, but also a ritual to calm the body's internal flow. In this way, the Ebers Papyrus reflects a holistic view of health that modern medicine only recently began to reconsider. The papyrus also reveals the continuity of human experience. Toothaches, infections, broken bones, eye irritation, fevers, the ailments described are familiar. The solutions, though ancient, show a desire for relief, understanding, and survival that feels deeply human. The magical medical papyrus, the Ebers Papyrus, stands as one of the oldest, most detailed medical documents in the world. It is not a relic of superstition, but a glimpse into a scientific tradition rooted in experience, ritual, and observation. A scroll written by hands now forgotten, guiding healers who lived beside the Nile 3,000 years ago, still speaking quietly through its ink and fiber. The high-precision cubit rod. In the study of ancient Egyptian engineering, few tools appear more ordinary than a straight measuring stick. Yet one particular instrument, the royal cubit rod, represents a level of precision that feels almost modern. Carved from wood, stone, or bronze, these rods carried markings so fine that some measured distances down to a few millimeters. And they were used not only for architecture, but for administration, surveying, and daily work across the Nile Valley. In a world without metal rulers, laser levels, or mechanical gauges, the cubit rod became the foundation of Egyptian measurement. Everything from pyramid blocks to temple corridors, granaries, canals, and furniture relied on its standard. The standard cubit was divided into 7 palms, each palm subdivided into 4 fingers, and each finger into smaller increments. The rods found in tombs and workshops show these subdivisions carved with sharp, delicate lines, each mark placed with intention, ensuring accuracy across the entire length. Some of the best preserved examples come from Thebes and Saqqara. The cubit rods found in burial chambers belong to scribes, architects, and officials, indicating that measurement was a respected profession. These rods were personal tools, used during life, and placed in tombs as symbols of skill and knowledge. One of the most famous rods belonged to an official named Maya. Made of dark wood, its surface is carved with rows of tiny markings. Each division is labeled with hieroglyphs, identifying fractional lengths. To make these rods, craftsmen needed a steady hand and a deep understanding of proportion. The precision is striking. Several rods measure nearly identical in total length, even though they were produced decades apart. This shows a system that maintained consistency over generations. The cubit rod was more than a ruler, it was part of how Egyptians understood order. Accurate measurement meant stable architecture, predictable taxation, and fair distribution of resources. Irrigation systems relied on measured channels. Temple alignments depended on calculated distances. Builders structured entire monuments using units recorded on rods no longer than an arm. In construction scenes on tomb walls, surveyors appear holding cords stretched between stakes. The cords, used to define straight lines and right angles, were checked against cubit rods. This process ensured that even large-scale measurements spanning tens or hundreds of meters ultimately depended on the markings of a small wooden tool. Experiments with replica rods show that such measurements can be incredibly consistent. When used carefully, a cubit rod can guide construction within tolerances that remain noticeable today. The straight edges of pyramid casing blocks, the symmetry of temple pylons, and the proportional design of statues still reflect the accuracy these rods made possible. The rods themselves reveal signs of heavy use. Many show rounded corners, smoothed edges, and faint scratches from repeated handling. Some feature calibration marks indicating that they were checked against master standards kept in temples or administrative centers. This suggests that Egypt had an early system of metrological control, a way of ensuring that measurements remained consistent across the kingdom. For archaeologists, the precision of cubit rods helps explain how large-scale projects maintained coherence. When thousands of workers shaped blocks, laid foundations, or aligned corridors, they were not improvising. They were following measurements that originated from standardized rods like these. The fractional system used on the rods also highlights Egyptian mathematical ability. Fractions such as 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and even 1/16 appear carved directly on the wood. This was not abstract mathematics. It was practical calculation, a system used by builders, surveyors, and craftsmen daily. Some rods include inscriptions describing the owner's titles or the purpose of the rod. Others include decorative elements or protective texts, suggesting that measurement was valued both technically and symbolically. To measure correctly was to maintain balance, a concept tied to the Egyptian idea of ma'at, the principle of order and harmony. The cubit rod also appears in ritual contexts. During foundation ceremonies for temples, priests used cords and rods to define sacred ground. The act of measuring became part of the religious process, an expression of placing divine order onto the physical world. The rods used in these ceremonies were often elaborate, made of expensive materials and decorated carefully. Yet the most common rods were simple wooden tools used by workers across Egypt. These rods are rarely shown in museums, overshadowed by grander artifacts, but they carry the quiet fingerprints of ancient precision. Some cubit rods were discovered in sealed storage areas, protected from decay. Others were found near construction sites, broken or worn down. Each example helps reconstruct a world where measurement underpinned everything from architecture to taxation. Through these tools, we see the Egyptians' practical intelligence. They understood that consistency mattered. They maintained standards across centuries, and they built monuments whose accuracy still challenges modern viewers. The high-precision cubit rod may look simple, but its impact is monumental. Every straight line carved into a stone block, every square chamber, every aligned corridor owes something to this tool. It stands today as a reminder that ancient engineering relied not only on labor and stone, but on knowledge measured in fractions, carved quietly into wood. A humble object guiding some of the most enduring structures ever built. The Serdab statue communication chambers. In the Old Kingdom mastabas, scattered across the desert plateau of Saqqara, archaeologists often find a small, sealed room hidden within the tomb's structure. It is not large enough for a visitor to enter, and not decorated like the offering chapels or burial shafts. It contains only one thing, a statue, usually of the tomb owner, placed in an upright pose, and facing outward from this concealed chamber are thin openings carved into the stone wall, like narrow slits or eye-level vents. These hidden rooms are called serdabs, and their purpose remains one of the quiet mysteries of early Egyptian mortuary architecture. The concept seems simple at first, a statue placed in a protected room, looking through slits into the world outside. But the intentional design, the careful placement, and the symbolic logic behind these chambers reveal something deeper, an attempt to create communication between the living and the dead. The serdab emerged during the Old Kingdom, around the time Egypt's earliest pyramids were being built. The tomb owner's statue, often carved from limestone, wood, or even granite, was placed within this chamber to act as a physical substitute for the deceased person. The Egyptians believed that the Ka, one aspect of the spirit, could reside in the statue when the body itself was inaccessible. The narrow slits allowed more than light to enter. They created a line of sight. Through these openings, the statue watched ritual activity in the offering chapel. Priests placed food, recited prayers, and performed ceremonies meant to sustain the dead in the afterlife. To the Egyptians, these rituals required a recipient. The serdab slit allowed the statue, and through it, the spirit, to remain present. The openings are usually placed at eye height, aligned with the face of the statue. Their angle is deliberate, and their width is narrow, just wide enough to allow sight and incense smoke to pass through, but not wide enough for a person to reach inside. This careful balance preserved the chamber's sanctity while maintaining the connection between ritual and spirit. Inside the serdab, the statue often stands rigidly, arms at its sides or crossed in a formal pose. The surfaces are polished, the eyes carefully shaped. Some statues were once painted with lifelike colors, and others had inlaid eyes made of stone, crystal, or copper. In the dim light passing through the slits, these eyes would have reflected a faint glimmer, giving the uncanny impression of a living presence observing the world outside. The role of the serdab goes beyond symbolism. It was part of a larger architectural system designed to support the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that offerings placed on altars would be absorbed spiritually by the deceased. The serdab ensured that the deceased was present during these rituals, even while physically hidden. This idea of presence through sight is unusual in ancient architecture. Most cultures place statues in open spaces. Egypt placed some of its most important statues in sealed chambers, allowing them to participate in rituals through a carefully engineered viewpoint. The chambers also protected the statue from theft or damage. In the Old Kingdom, tomb robbing was a risk even soon after burial. The serdab kept the statue, the physical vessel for the spirit, safe behind stone. Even if the outer chapel was damaged, the serdab's hidden presence remained. Serdabs also appear in royal contexts. At the step pyramid complex of Djoser, a large serdab holds a life-size statue of the king, looking out through twin slits toward the Hebsed court. In this ritual space, ceremonies of rejuvenation took place, ensuring the king's eternal strength. The positioning suggests that the serdab was not merely symbolic, but played an active role in connecting the statue to the rituals enacted outside. The openings themselves vary in shape. Some are vertical slits, others small, square holes carved at precise angles. Engineers studying these openings have noted that they sometimes align with specific processional paths or altar positions. This alignment was not coincidence, it was architectural intent. Inside the serdab, conditions were stable. Temperature, humidity, and physical protection helped preserve the statue. Many serdab statues survived thousands of years, far better than objects left in open areas of tombs. This preservation was likely part of the design. The Egyptians expected these statues to last forever, continuing to receive offerings as long as the rituals continued. Some serdabs contain multiple statues, representing different aspects of the deceased or members of the same household. Others include fragments of offering tables or small ritual objects, emphasizing the connection between the chamber and the ceremonies outside. Yet the statues themselves remain still, silent, and unseen, except through narrow slits, as if they existed in a separate plane, parallel to the world of the living. When modern archaeologists discovered these chambers, they often felt a sense of unease. Opening a sealed serdab meant confronting a statue that had been looking outward for thousands of years, waiting for ceremonies that no longer came. Its eyes still aligned with the slits, its posture upright, its purpose suspended. Today, serdabs offer a rare glimpse into the way the Egyptians blended architecture, belief, and ritual into a single system. They show that for the Egyptians, the afterlife was not abstract. It required physical structures, designed with precision, to support spiritual interaction. The serdab statue communication chambers remind us that ancient Egyptian tombs were not designed as silent burial places. They were engineered environments, meant to sustain a relationship between living and dead, a relationship maintained through narrow slits, carved carefully into stone, allowing a statue to watch forever. A hidden room, a statue in darkness, a thin opening facing the ritual world outside, a quiet, architectural bridge between two realms. The tomb doors with stone hinges. In the deep corridors of Egypt's rock-cut tombs, there is a kind of engineering that visitors often walk past without noticing. It is not decorated with hieroglyphs. It is not gilded or painted. It is a door carved from stone, weighing tons that can rotate with surprising ease. These are the stone pivot doors of ancient Egyptian tombs, an architectural solution that feels almost mechanical in its simplicity. Massive slabs of limestone or granite set into recesses, held in place not by metal hinges, but by carved stone pins that sit inside perfectly shaped sockets in the floor and ceiling. A door that should be immovable instead swings with a balanced, controlled motion. The earliest examples appear in Old Kingdom mastabas and continued into the Middle and New Kingdoms. Some were designed to seal burial chambers permanently, while others served as symbolic barriers, thresholds between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But nearly all share the same core technology: a pivoting stone slab mounted on two rounded projections carved directly into the door itself. The secret lies in the geometry. At the top and bottom of these doors, Egyptian masons carved rounded knobs, one projecting upward, another downward. In the ceiling and floor, workers carved cup-shaped sockets. When the door was lifted into place, these knobs fit snugly inside the sockets, allowing the entire slab to rotate on a central axis. No metal, no wood, only stone fitting into stone. Despite their weight, these doors could be opened by a single person. The pivot points reduced friction so effectively that the movement felt smooth, deliberate, and quiet, a feature that likely added to the atmosphere of tomb rituals. In many burial chambers, the door was placed slightly recessed into a doorway frame. When closed, it blended perfectly with the wall, becoming almost invisible. To an untrained eye, a pivot door looked like a continuous slab of stone. Only by applying pressure at the edge would the hidden axis reveal itself. This design accomplished several goals at once. It sealed the tomb against intrusion. It allowed priests or burial teams to enter and exit during construction and rituals. It created a symbolic threshold that could be closed forever after burial. Some doors were locked in place once the burial was complete. The bottom socket was filled with debris or plaster, preventing rotation. In other cases, the door was left functional, allowing later priests to maintain rituals inside the tomb. Archaeologists encountering these doors in the 19th century often expressed surprise. The stone looked too massive to move, yet when cleaned of dust and debris, many doors still rotated after thousands of years. Their pivots remained intact, their sockets still shaped perfectly. The craftsmanship required to carve these pivot points was precise. If the knobs were even slightly misaligned, the door would jam. If the sockets were uneven, the door would not rotate smoothly. Masons had to measure carefully, working by hand in dark, confined chambers, shaping stone into mechanical components long before the concept of a hinge existed. One of the best preserved examples comes from the mastaba of Hesi-Ra at Saqqara. The limestone door, though weathered, still sits within its pivot sockets. The upper knob fits neatly into the ceiling recess, while the lower knob rests in a circular depression worn smooth by repeated use. This wear pattern proves that the door was opened many times during the tomb's active period. In other tombs, such as those in the Valley of the Kings, the pivot doors show signs of intentional sealing. The bottom sockets were clogged with plaster, or the stone knobs were chipped to prevent movement. This suggests changing ritual practices. Some tombs needed ongoing access, while others were meant to be sealed permanently. The engineering logic of these doors also appears in temples. Certain temple gates used enlarged versions of the pivot system, with door leaves that stood several meters tall. Instead of stone knobs, these later examples sometimes used wooden pivots wrapped in metal, influenced by evolving technology. But the earliest mechanical inspiration came from the stone tomb doors of the Old Kingdom. The simplest pivot door was a single slab, rotating on its axis. More complex versions included double doors, two slabs meeting in the center of the doorway, each rotating on its own pivot sockets. These required perfect symmetry to operate smoothly, and their construction reflects high levels of planning. For the priests performing rituals inside tombs, the door was more than a barrier. It was a controlled entrance into a sacred space. Opening it was part of ceremony. Closing it was an act of finality. The pivot system allowed these actions to happen quietly, with dignity, without the scraping or dragging that a traditional stone block would create. When archaeologists examine these doors today, the engineering remains impressive. The pivot knobs are shaped with clean lines. The sockets are smooth and intentional. In some chambers, traces of lubricant, possibly animal fat or oil, remain near the sockets, suggesting Egyptians understood friction reduction in practical terms. These doors also reveal something about Egyptian priorities. Monumental architecture demanded permanence, but also functionality. The tomb needed to be sealed, yet accessible during construction. The pivot door solved both problems. It was durable, concealable, and mechanically efficient. Standing in a dark tomb corridor today, the door's presence feels almost theatrical. It sits flush against the wall, silent, heavy, waiting. And if the stone dust is cleared, and someone presses gently against the edge, the door still shifts, as though responding to a motion it remembers. The tomb doors, with stone hinges, show that ancient engineering was not always grand. Sometimes it was subtle, a single slab, perfectly balanced, rotating on stone. A quiet invention, hidden inside tombs, enabling movement where none seemed possible. These doors are reminders that ancient Egyptians were not only builders of monuments, but designers of mechanisms. And in the silent chambers of their tombs, those mechanisms still wait, intact after 4,000 years, marking the threshold between the living and the dead, with simple, elegant precision. The granite bowl laths. In museum displays across the world, Egyptian stone bowls sit quietly on shelves, smooth, round, and almost too perfect for their age. Many of these bowls come from the early dynastic and Old Kingdom periods, more than 4,000 years ago. Some are made of limestone or alabaster, easy materials to shape, but others are carved from granite, diorite, and schist stones so hard that cutting them with copper tools seems nearly impossible. What draws the most attention are the interior curves, perfectly circular, evenly symmetrical, showing marks that resemble the tracks left by a rotating tool. These bowls have prompted debate for decades, not because they are impossible, but because they reveal a level of stoneworking skill that is rarely spotlighted in ancient Egypt. The idea of a bowl lathe comes not from speculation, but from the visible tool marks, parallel striations, uniform radii, and internal symmetry that suggest the bowls were shaped through a controlled, repetitive motion. The Egyptians did not use metal lathes, but they did have methods for rotating objects or rotating tools that acted like early versions of lathes. Archaeological finds from workshops in Saqqara and Abydos show stone drills, copper tubes, weighted flywheels, and bow-driven shafts. These devices, when paired with abrasive sand, allowed craftsmen to cut into hard stone by rotation. The principle is the same one behind a lathe, material removed through repeating circular motion. The granite bowls likely required a combination of these methods. Stoneworkers may have mounted partially shaped vessels on wooden supports, using a rotating motion to shape the interior. Copper chisels would not have cut granite directly, but quartz sand, mixed with water and pressed between a rotating tool and the stone surface, could slowly grind out material. The evidence lies in the bowls themselves. The inner walls show consistent arcs that match rotational grinding. Surfaces are too regular to have been shaped only by hammering or scraping. In some examples, the bowl's thickness varies by less than a few millimeters, all around a level of symmetry that suggests controlled movement rather than freehand carving. The most famous examples come from the First Dynasty tombs at Saqqara. Excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries uncovered hundreds of stone vessels, many unfinished, some broken, others complete. The unfinished pieces reveal clues, incomplete grooves, partially formed circles, and drill holes precisely placed to remove internal material. These pieces show process, not mystery. They capture the moment a craftsman stopped working, leaving behind the marks of the tools used. Granite is a particularly stubborn stone. Even modern tools struggle with it. For the Egyptians, the key was abrasive. Quartz sand, abundant along the Nile, has a hardness nearly equal to granite itself. When used with rotary motion, it becomes a powerful cutting agent. Rotating copper tubes with sand inside could drill cylindrical holes. Rotating stone or wooden rods pressed against a bowl interior could smooth and deepen curves. Repeated over weeks, the process could create the almost perfect symmetry seen today. This work required time, patience, and experience. The skill of the craftsmen who made these bowls is often underestimated. To achieve a near-perfect curve, they needed steady rotational speed, consistent pressure, and repeated checking of thickness. The precision is not an accident, it is the result of long, learned technique. The mystery is not technological impossibility. It is the level of refinement achieved with simple tools. Standing before these bowls in a museum, the surfaces look modern. The curves feel engineered. It is hard to imagine someone sitting in a dim workshop 4,000 years ago, using a bow drill and abrasive sand to grind granite into curves, so precise that the interior feels machined. But that is exactly what the archaeological record supports: advanced technique, achieved with simple devices used in disciplined, repetitive ways. Some bowls exhibit spiral striations that match the motion of a rotating abrasive tool. Others show concentric rings that appear when a fixed abrasive tip moves in circular paths. Unfinished bowls sometimes contain drill holes positioned around the interior perimeter, evidence that multiple cylindrical cuts were used to remove material before final shaping. Experimental archaeology has recreated similar results. Modern craftsmen using copper tools, wooden shafts, and sand have successfully reproduced the marks and symmetry found in the original bowls. It is slow, difficult work, but achievable with skill and patience. What remains unknown is the full range of tools used in ancient workshops. Copper parts decay, wooden fixtures vanish. The stone bowls themselves survive better than the machines that shape them. This creates the impression of mystery, but the bowls hold the clues that the tools did exist. The granite bowl workshops represent a moment in early Egypt when stone craftsmanship reached an extraordinary level. These vessels were not everyday items. They were elite objects, placed in tombs as symbols of prestige, ritual, and status. Their creation required trained artisans, whose craft was highly valued. Some bowls are small and delicate. Others are large, heavy, and deeply carved. A few show decorative grooves running around the exterior grooves that mirror the circular lines inside, suggesting the whole piece was rotated during shaping. In the still air of museums, they sit quietly, giving no hint of the hours of grinding, carving, and checking that shaped them. Yet each bowl preserves the marks of its making tiny lines that curve around the interior, creating a record of motion frozen in stone. The granite bowl lathes remind us that in the ancient world, precision did not require complex machinery. It required technique. It required time. It required the willingness to repeat the same motion, day after day, until a rough block of granite became a flawless circular vessel. And in those marks still faintly visible inside the bowls, we see the hands of the ancient craftsmen at work, their tools rotating slowly, cutting stone grain by grain, shaping objects that continue to puzzle and inspire anyone who looks closely. The giant stone boxes of Dashur, south of Saqqara, on the desert plain of Dashur, archaeologists uncovered a set of massive stone boxes that continue to raise quiet questions about how they were made. These are not simple coffins or storage spaces. They are huge, cube-like crypts built from single blocks of limestone and granite, weighing dozens of tons each. Their shapes are geometric. Their interiors are smooth. Their precision stands out even among Egypt's most advanced stonework. These stone boxes belong primarily to Middle Kingdom pyramids, especially those of Senusret III and Amenemhat III. Their purpose was to protect the burial chamber at the heart of the pyramid. But what makes them striking is the level of workmanship seen in their surfaces. The outer walls are flat and square. The corners meet with clean angles, and the inner cavity carved deep inside solid stone shows an unexpected level of smoothness, almost reflective under light. The interiors were not polished for display. No one was meant to look inside once the box was sealed. Yet the surfaces reveal a kind of attention to detail that goes beyond basic engineering. The walls feel uniform in thickness, the corners are sharp, and the flat planes show few signs of unevenness. These characteristics suggest a slow, careful process involving consistent measurement and steady removal of material. Carving a cavity inside a block of limestone or granite is not a simple task. The Egyptians achieved this with a combination of copper chisels, pounding stones, grinding tools, and abrasive sand. For granite especially, copper tools alone were not enough to cut deeply. Instead, abrasives, quartz, sand, and crushed stone served as the actual cutting agent. Workers used repeated strokes, grinding motions, and long hours of labor to hollow out these large blocks. The unfinished boxes from Dashur help illustrate the process. Some sections reveal chisel marks left from the early stages of carving. Others show wide, straight cuts along the interior walls, consistent with saw-like tools used with abrasive slurry. The flatness of the surfaces suggests that workers used wooden or copper guiding frames to keep their cuts straight, adjusting gradually until the walls reached the proper depth. Even so, the level of smoothness inside some boxes appears unusually high. The surfaces do not show the deep, rough pitting common in other large stone chambers. Instead, they appear worked down through finely ground abrasives, possibly involving prolonged polishing with stone rubbers. This would have required teams of craftsmen applying continuous pressure, grinding the same surfaces over and over until the walls took on a near-finished quality. Outside the boxes, the lids are equally monumental. Many lids weigh several tons and were shaped to fit closely onto the box beneath. Some lids have recessed rims that lock into the upper edges of the box, creating a tight seal once closed. This precision would have helped protect the burial chamber from moisture, sand, and potential tampering. Moving these boxes into position required significant planning. In the pyramid of Senusret III, for example, The stone box appears to have been placed in the burial chamber before the ceiling stones were added. This means the entire crypt was built around it. Workers likely lowered the box down ramps into a pre-dug shaft, adjusting its position using ropes, levers, and sand pits. Once the box was in place, the chamber's ceiling slabs, some weighing tens of tons, were placed overhead, sealing the structure. Inside these burial chambers, the stone boxes served a symbolic as well as practical purpose. They represented protection, permanence, and separation from the outside world. The smoothness of the interiors reflects a level of care often reserved for objects connected to the king's afterlife journey. Even if the burial goods were simple, the container itself expressed stability and security. Many of the boxes are now empty. Grave robbing in ancient times left most Middle Kingdom pyramids stripped of their contents. Yet the boxes themselves remain intact, their surfaces still showing the marks of craftsmanship. Their empty interiors, silent and stripped, highlight the contrast between the effort that went into their creation and the absence of what they once held. Some researchers point out that the angles inside the boxes are sharper than what copper tools typically produce. But archaeological evidence from workshops around Egypt shows that the Egyptians used pounding stones made from harder rocks like dolerite, which could break through granite surfaces. Combined with quartz sand, these pounding and grinding tools were capable of shaping stone to tight tolerances slowly, but effectively. The question of how long it took to carve one of these boxes remains open. Estimates suggest that weeks or months of continuous labor were required, depending on the hardness of the stone. The precision, however, indicates that time was not the main concern. Accuracy mattered more. Standing inside the ruins of Dashur today, the boxes appear almost out of place. They sit within collapsed chambers, surrounded by rubble that fell long after their construction. The sharp lines of their interiors contrast with the irregular, broken stones around them. They feel deliberate in a landscape shaped by erosion and decay. Each box represents a kind of architectural anchor, massive, immovable, designed to outlast the structures built around it. Even when pyramids collapsed or were robbed, the stone boxes endured. Their size and density made them difficult to fracture or remove. As a result, they remain among the best-preserved artifacts of Middle Kingdom royal tombs. The giant stone boxes of Dashur provide insight into the Egyptians' approach to permanence. These were not decorative pieces. They were not public monuments. They were hidden containers meant to protect the core of a burial. Yet the precision found in their interiors shows a dedication to craftsmanship that reflects the beliefs of the time. The afterlife required security, and security required precision. Their smooth walls, sharp corners, and tight-fitting lids continue to raise questions about technique, but leave no doubt about intention. They were built to last. And in the quiet chambers of Dashur, they remain silent evidence of a civilization that measured permanence in stone, the ancient Egyptian glass furnace. When people think about ancient glassmaking, they often imagine the workshops of Greece or Rome. But long before those cultures refined the craft, Egypt was already experimenting with glass heating, coloring, and shaping it in ways that required controlled temperatures and specialized equipment. The most important evidence for this comes from a site at Amarna, where archaeologists uncovered structures believed to be some of the earliest known glass furnaces in the ancient world. These furnaces were not large kilns like the ones used for pottery. They were compact, purpose-built installations designed to reach temperatures high enough to melt silica and transform raw materials into colored glass ingots. The discovery at Amarna changed the way historians understood Egyptian technology, showing that glassmaking in Egypt was not merely an import from other cultures. It was a craft developed, refined, and managed under royal supervision. The furnaces at Amarna date to the reign of Akhenaten in the 14th century BCE. Excavations revealed circular structures made of clay and mud brick, with evidence of intense heat exposure on the interior surfaces. These furnaces included lower fire chambers and upper working areas where glass mixtures were heated. Inside the debris layers, researchers found lumps of raw glass, crushed quartz, fragments of colored ingots, and tools used for stirring or lifting molten material. To produce glass, Egyptians combined quartz pebbles, natron, lime, and metallic colorants. The mixture was heated until it fused into a solid mass. The process required precise temperature control. If the heat was too low, the mixture remained grainy. If too high, it would degrade, bubble, or crack. This is what makes the Amarna glass furnaces significant. They show that Egypt had mastered the ability to maintain consistent high temperatures long before large-scale glassblowing emerged in the Mediterranean. The glass produced at Amarna was not usually shaped into vessels in the furnace. Instead, workers created glass ingots, small, solid blocks of brightly colored material. These ingots were then transported to other workshops, where craftsmen reheated and shaped them into beads, inlays, scarabs, and small containers. The production system was specialized, and evidence suggests that it was organized under state control. The presence of high-quality cobalt blue and deep red ingots indicates that Amarna was part of a coordinated supply chain. Inside the furnaces, archaeologists found blue, yellow, and red residues. These colors came from metal oxides, copper for blues and greens, iron for ambers, and manganese or lead for purples. The consistency of the colors suggests that Egyptian craftsmen understood how to measure and repeat formulas, adjusting their mixtures based on experience rather than written instructions. The structures around the furnaces include workrooms filled with crushed quartz, broken molds, and scraps of fuel. These materials reveal the practical side of the craft. Quartz had to be broken down into fine powder using grinding stones before it could be melted. Natron, collected from dry lake beds, acted as a flux that lowered the melting point. Fuel, mostly wood and plant fibers, had to be fed steadily into the fire chamber to keep temperatures high. Working inside these rooms would not have been comfortable. They were hot, smoky, and noisy spaces. The glow of the furnace would illuminate quartz dust, tools, and unfinished ingots scattered around the floor. Unlike pottery kilns, which could be fired and left to cool, glass furnaces required continuous attention. Someone had to maintain the fire, monitor the color of the molten mixture, and remove the ingots at the right moment. The Amarna furnaces also provide clues to the administrative world behind the craft. Tablets found elsewhere in Egypt record shipments of glass, sometimes from one palace, workshop to another. The uniformity of ingot size and color across Egypt suggests centralized production rather than local improvisation. Glass was expensive, labor-intensive, and sometimes used in diplomatic gifts sent to neighboring kingdoms. Other archaeological sites, such as Quantir in the Delta, confirm that Egypt produced glass on an industrial scale during certain periods. But the Amarna discovery remains the clearest example of a fully preserved workshop. The layout shows designated zones: one area for grinding quartz, another for mixing ingredients, another for heating furnaces, and adjacent rooms for cooling and storing ingots. This organization implies both experience and planning, not experimentation. The glass itself reveals technical understanding. When viewed under magnification, ancient Egyptian glass shows a consistent texture with few impurities. The colors are vivid and stable even after millennia. This reflects careful control of raw materials and firing conditions. It also challenges the older assumption that Egyptians acquired glass knowledge from others. The evidence now points to Egypt as one of the earliest centers of innovation in glass technology. Inside museums, visitors often see Egyptian glass beads, tiny vessels, and inlays embedded in furniture or jewelry. These small pieces do not immediately reveal the complexity behind their manufacture. The furnace rooms at Amarna give context to these objects, showing that behind every bead was a long process involving quarrying, grinding, heating, cooling, and transport. The mystery surrounding ancient Egyptian glassmaking is not about unknown technology. It is about skill and organization. The tools were simple: clay furnaces, wooden paddles, stone grinders. The knowledge came from repetition and observation, passed from one generation of craftsmen to the next. What remains fascinating is how early Egyptians achieved such consistent results with materials that required delicate handling. Their furnaces were built from earth and clay, yet they reached temperatures high enough to produce uniform batches of glass. Their pigments were sourced from minerals scattered across deserts and mines. Their quartz was ground by hand. And still, the final product was fine, bright, and remarkably stable. Standing in the ruins of Amarna today, the furnace rooms do not look impressive. The walls are low, the chambers collapsed, but the traces of molten glass fused into the clay walls tell a clear story, one of experimentation, mastery, and craftsmanship. The ancient Egyptian glass furnace shows that technological innovation in the ancient world was not always visible in grand monuments. Sometimes it existed in small, hot rooms, among broken quartz and glowing ingots, shaped by workers whose names have been forgotten. Their work transformed raw earth into color and reshaped our understanding of early glassmaking. The lost copper tying technique, across temple ruins and ancient quarries in Egypt, archaeologists occasionally uncover a detail so small it's easy to overlook: thin slots carved into the tops or sides of stone blocks, sometimes holding traces of metal corrosion. These narrow recesses once held copper clamps, small bands used to secure adjoining stones. At first glance, they seem insignificant, but together, they hint at a construction method that has been only partially understood, a technique sometimes called copper tying. This was not welding in the modern sense, nor a hidden mechanical system. It was a practical way of stabilizing stone surfaces using metal bands cast directly into carved grooves. The use of metal clamps in ancient architecture is known from many cultures, but the Egyptian examples stand out because they appear in both monumental and practical structures, and sometimes show a level of integration between stone and metal that required coordination during construction. The technique relies on careful preparation, carving a channel, inserting a clamp, and filling the space with molten copper so that the metal bonds to the stone as it cools. The oldest examples date to the Old Kingdom. In certain mastabas at Saqqara, stone blocks contain shallow recesses that once held copper or bronze clamps. Over time, the metal corroded away, leaving discoloration in the stone. In rare cases, small fragments still survive. These clamps tied one stone block to another, acting as stabilizing joints. They did not carry weight like modern reinforcements. Instead, they held surfaces in place, ensured alignment, and prevented sliding. More substantial evidence appears in Middle and New Kingdom temples. At sites like Karnak and Medinet Habu, blocks on upper walls show rectangular recesses carved with precision. When excavated, these recesses sometimes contain lumps of oxidized copper, remnants of clamps that once secured the blocks against seasonal expansion, seismic tremors, and structural shifting. To use the copper clamps, Egyptian builders followed a sequence. Blocks were positioned tightly together. Narrow channels were carved across the joint. A clamp was inserted, or the recess was prepared to receive molten metal. Heated copper was poured into the cavity, filling the carved slot. As the copper cooled, it shrank slightly, gripping the stone on both sides. The result was a hidden mechanical tie, a simple, effective method, long before iron clamps became common. One of the clearest examples comes from the Temple of Amenhotep III at Luxor. Here, the recesses are cut with remarkable uniformity. The clamps appear to have been planned during construction, not added afterward. The dimensions of the slots repeat across large sections of the temple, suggesting standardized tools and methods. This indicates that the copper tying technique was an organized part of architectural practice, not an improvised solution. Copper is soft compared to stone, yet when poured into place and locked between surfaces, it resists shearing and displacement. The Egyptians understood this mechanical principle well. The technique helped maintain alignment in long wall sections and joint lines, especially where blocks met at corners or along high ledges exposed to wind and shifting temperatures. The challenge lies in the casting process. Melting copper requires temperatures around 1,000 degrees Celsius. Furnaces capable of this existed throughout Egypt, but transporting molten metal to construction sites required coordination. The molten copper had to stay hot, flow cleanly, and fill the recess without cooling prematurely. This implies that clamps were cast directly on site, likely using small clay crucibles heated near the work area. Working with molten copper was dangerous. The metal had to be poured with accuracy into narrow slots carved into stone. Yet the archaeological evidence shows consistency, suggesting that the craftsmen responsible were experienced, methodical, and well-trained. While clamps often appear in exterior structures, they also appear in more controlled environments, such as sarcophagus lids and certain burial chamber fittings. Here, the technique may have served symbolic as well as mechanical purposes. Securing the burial chamber ensured long-term stability and sealed the space with materials that could not be easily removed. The term lost technique is somewhat misleading. The principles behind copper clamps are understood, but the exact workflow from furnace temperature to pouring method to clamp shape remains partially unclear because so few complete clamps survived. Copper corrodes, and ancient metal was often scavenged. What we have today is mostly the negative space, grooves where clamps once were, impressions of their shapes, and traces of metal corrosion along the stone. This absence leaves room for quiet questions. Did Egyptians cast all clamps directly into place, or did they pre-form some and hammer them in? Were clamps used only in specific types of structures, or were they more widespread than the surviving evidence shows? How many construction sites once held clamps that were later removed during stone reuse in later periods? Experimental archaeology has shown that molten copper poured into stone recesses can create a solid mechanical bond. The stone does not crack under heat if the pour is small and controlled. As copper cools, it contracts slightly, gripping the stone tightly. This matches what we see in the archaeological record. Slots carved with consistent widths, sometimes rounded at the base to improve bonding. The technique does not appear everywhere. It is selective, appearing in walls that needed stabilization, in corners exposed to stress, and in structures built on shifting foundations. That pattern reveals something important. Egyptians did not add copper clamps casually. They used them where structure demanded reinforcement. Standing at temple ruins today, the recesses left by copper clamps are often overlooked. They appear as simple rectangular cuts in stone, easy to mistake for missing decoration or damage. But these small features represent an entire layer of engineering hidden beneath the surface of monumental architecture. They show that Egyptian builders paid close attention to the mechanical behavior of stone. They knew that even perfectly carved blocks could shift. They understood the need for stability across long walls. And they developed a technique simple, effective, almost invisible, that helped their structures endure for thousands of years. The lost copper tying technique is not a symbol of forgotten technology. It is a reminder that ancient engineering was often subtle, hidden, and grounded in practical knowledge. A thin band of copper, poured into a carved recess, holding stones together through centuries of heat, cold, and shifting sand. A small detail, carrying a long legacy. The ancient Egyptian papyrus factory. In the long corridors of Egyptian history, few inventions were as transformative as papyrus. Long before parchment or paper spread across the Mediterranean, Egypt had already developed a writing material that could be produced in large quantities, stored easily, and transported across vast distances. Behind this innovation was an organized production system, what many scholars consider the world's first industrial-scale writing material factory. Papyrus begins not as a sheet, but as a plant. The papyrus reed grew thick along the Nile marshes, especially in the delta. Its triangular stalk was strong, fibrous, and naturally adhesive. Egyptians learned early that when sliced, thin, and pressed together, its fibers bonded without glue. This bonding property became the foundation of an entire writing industry. The earliest written references to papyrus production date to the Old Kingdom. But, by the New Kingdom, especially around centers like Memphis and Thebes, papyrus making evolved into a tightly controlled craft. Evidence suggests that parts of the process were centralized under state administration. Certain papyrus documents mention royal oversight, taxation of papyrus shipments, and scribes assigned specifically to monitor production. The factories themselves were not large stone buildings like temples or workshops. They were more like production compounds, clusters of rooms with basins, pounding stones, drying racks, and storage areas. Archaeological traces come from waste deposits, piles of shredded stalks, broken ceramic basins, and papyrus scraps too damaged for writing. The process began with harvesting. Workers cut mature papyrus stalks, stripped the green rind, and sliced the inner pith into long, thin strips. These strips were laid out in two layers, one vertical, one horizontal. The natural sap inside the plant acted as a bonding agent. When pressed under weight and moisture, the layers fused into a single sheet. In small household production, this could be done manually, but for industrial-scale output, the process required coordination. In factory settings, basins were used to soak strips, softening the fibers. Wooden boards and stone weights pressed stacks of sheets. Workers trimmed edges to uniform sizes. Repeated pressing and drying ensured that sheets stayed flat and durable. The final product was light, smooth, and flexible, ideal for ink made from soot or ochre mixed with water and gum. The scale of output becomes clear when looking at scribal archives. Administrative centers produce thousands of documents each year: tax records, temple accounts, legal contracts, letters, medical texts, and ritual manuals. This volume required consistent supply. Factories met that need. Papyrus rolls were produced in standardized widths. Sheets were attached edge to edge using paste made from plant resin. A finished roll could reach several meters in length. Scribes wrote from right to left, unrolling the sheet as they progressed. The consistency of sheet size across thousands of surviving documents shows that workshops followed established standards. The papyrus factories also reflect Egypt's administrative mindset. Scribes depended on reliable materials to document grain deliveries, royal decrees, religious ceremonies, and construction orders. The smooth, uniform surface of factory-made papyrus made such documentation possible. The industry also had an economic dimension. Papyrus was exported to the Levant, Cyprus, and later to Greece and Rome. It became a valuable trade commodity, controlled heavily to protect its quality and supply. Foreign scribes admired Egyptian papyrus for its durability. Even today, intact sheets survive from libraries nearly 3,000 years old. Inside the factories, the work was repetitive, but skilled. Workers had to slice the pith with consistent thickness. They aligned layers carefully to avoid weak points. Pressing required balanced moisture. Too much produced warped sheets. Too little resulted in brittle ones. Drying racks had to be monitored, as the sheets cured under the heat of the Egyptian sun. One of the most interesting aspects of papyrus factories is their connection to scribal training. Students at scribal schools practiced writing on lower-quality sheets, factory rejects, offcuts, or sheets that had dried imperfectly. This allowed scribes to learn without wasting high-quality material. The waste from these training sessions, ink blotches, crossed-out lines, practice numerals, has been found in rubbish heaps near workshop areas. The factories also reveal something about Egypt's approach to technology. Unlike stoneworking or metallurgy, papyrus making did not rely on complex tools. The innovation was in process, not machinery. The plant's natural bonding ability was the real technology. The factories simply organized it at scale. Despite the lack of large architectural remains, the traces of production tell a clear story. The steady supply of papyrus over centuries required systems harvesting schedules, transport routes, quality control, and storage. These systems were part of an administrative landscape that helped Egypt maintain one of the most extensive written cultures of the ancient world. Standing in museum rooms today, the papyrus scrolls seem fragile light sheets inscribed with black ink, carrying stories, accounts, and names across millennia. But behind each sheet was a long chain of labor: harvesting, slicing, pressing, drying, trimming, rolling. The ancient Egyptian papyrus factory shows that writing was not just an intellectual activity. It was rooted in physical production, in the hands of workers shaping plant fibers into the foundation of an entire civilization's record-keeping system. Without these factories, Egypt's history, its numbers, its laws, its rituals, its stories would be just faint traces. With them, it became one of the most thoroughly documented cultures of the ancient world. The granite drilling cores of Saqqara. In the workshops and burial grounds of Saqqara, archaeologists have uncovered objects that look strikingly modern despite their age. They are small cylinders of stone drill cores removed from granite and hard limestone during the early dynastic and Old Kingdom periods. These cores are remarkable not because of what they are, but because of how they were made. Their surfaces show spiral grooves, consistent circular removal, and clean, parallel sides that suggest a controlled drilling technique far more advanced than most people imagine existed around 2500 BCE. These granite cores were discovered among the debris of temple workshops, tomb shafts, and stone-cutting sites surrounding the step pyramid complex. Some are only a few centimeters wide. Others are larger, with a smooth circumference and a hollow interior that once matched the center of a drilled hole. They are physical evidence of a tool system that relied on rotary motion, one of the foundational techniques of stoneworking. The Egyptians did not have iron drill bits during this period. They used copper tubes, bow mechanisms, weighted handles, and, most importantly, abrasive sand. The copper tube was not the cutting agent. Quartz grains mixed with water performed the actual grinding. As the tube rotated, powered by a bow or hand-spun drill, sand particles trapped between the copper and granite slowly carved their way into the stone. The drill core remained inside the tube as the material was removed in a circular shape. When the hole was deep enough, the core broke away, leaving behind a cylindrical stone piece. These cores are what we find today, small, silent witnesses of ancient craftsmanship. The spiral striations seen on the core surfaces are the result of this rotating process. As the drill turned, the abrasive slurry cut grooves that spiraled downward. The angle and spacing of these grooves reveal the rhythm of the drilling motion, steady, controlled, repeated over long periods. They do not indicate mechanical machinery. They indicate skilled manual work using simple tools with rotational capability. At Saqqara, some of the cores come from granite, one of the hardest stones used by Egyptians. Granite contains quartz crystals nearly as hard as the abrasive sand itself. Drilling into it required patience, consistent pressure, and a long supply of fresh abrasive. The fact that these cores exist at all proves the effectiveness of the technique. Archaeologists studying the grooves note that many cores show consistent wall thickness, meaning the drill kept its position without wobbling. This level of control suggests that craftsmen stabilized their drilling tubes using wooden frames or guides, creating a straight axis during operation. These guides prevented the tube from drifting and allowed deeper, cleaner cuts. Excavations at workshops near Djoser's complex revealed drill fragments, tubes with worn ends, and discarded cores lying near shaped granite blocks. These finds form a complete picture. Stonecutters used rotary drilling to create holes for dowels, sockets for fittings, and recesses needed for architectural components. The technique was practical and widespread, not experimental. The cores also reveal the scaling of ancient stonework. Some are only a few millimeters thick around the circumference, indicating precision drilling in small areas. Others are much larger, removed from thick granite slabs, used in sarcophagi or architectural supports. This range shows that the technique was adaptable, capable of fine detail and heavy-duty material removal. The spiral marks have often been misinterpreted in modern discussions as evidence of lost machinery, but archaeological experiments demonstrate that similar grooves appear naturally when using copper tubes with quartz abrasives. The pattern emerges from the combination of rotation, downward pressure, and the movement of abrasive grains, trapped beneath the tube. Modern reconstructions have recreated the same striations almost exactly, yet even with a clear explanation, the cores remain fascinating. They highlight an unexpected truth. Egypt's stoneworkers understood rotational cutting long before complex machines existed. Their tools were simple, but their technique was highly refined. The amount of labor required for drilling granite by hand was enormous. Workers needed to replenish abrasive frequently, maintain water levels, and keep the drill upright. Progress was slow, sometimes only a few millimeters per hour. But over weeks of steady work, deep holes could be carved with remarkable consistency. Some cores show polished surfaces from repeated contact with abrasive slurry, giving them a smooth, uniform texture. Others show chipped ends, where the core was broken out manually. They are the byproducts of a process that left few written records, but abundant physical evidence. The context in which cores appear is revealing. At Saqqara, cores are found near granite sarcophagus, lids, hard stone statues, architectural joints, workshop floors, unfinished stone pieces. This distribution shows that drilling was not a rare or ceremonial technique. It was part of everyday stone production for elite projects. One of the most revealing finds comes from an unfinished tomb chamber, where partially drilled holes remain embedded in the wall. The cylindrical recesses align perfectly, their walls straight, their bottoms concave from the movement of the drill. Nearby lay small fragments of broken cores. The scene captures a frozen moment of ancient work drilling mid-progress, abandoned but preserved. The precision of these holes explains why drilling was essential. It allowed stoneworkers to remove internal material efficiently, create accurate mortises and sockets, prepare stones for lifting or fitting, shape cavities for ritual objects, all using tools simple in created in stated appearance, but requiring deep familiarity. Today, the granite drilling cores of Saqqara are displayed in museums as small, unassuming pieces. Visitors often pass by them without a second glance. But these small cylinders preserve evidence of one of ancient Egypt's most sophisticated stoneworking techniques. They show the combination of manual skill, patience, and practical innovation that allowed Egyptians to shape some of the hardest materials known to them. The cores do not represent lost machinery. They represent mastery of simple tools used with discipline. In their spiral grooves and clean shapes, we see the fingerprints of craftsmen who understood stone intimately, craftsmen who drilled into granite 4,000 years ago with techniques still visible today. The granite drilling cores of Saqqara remind us that ancient engineering often leaves its clearest traces not in grand monuments, but in the small, discarded pieces that once lay on workshop floors, quiet evidence of a craft that shaped an entire civilization, one rotation at a time. The precision stone bowls of Saqqara. In the storerooms and galleries of museums, a particular category of Egyptian objects often draws silent curiosity. Small, perfectly carved stone bowls, made from some of the hardest rocks available in the ancient world, diorite, schist, and other dense metamorphic stones. Many of these bowls come from Saqqara, especially from early dynastic tombs, dating more than 4,500 years ago. Their shapes are clean and symmetrical. Their walls are thin. Their interiors curve with graceful regularity. For objects made so early in Egyptian history, they display a level of precision that is both technically impressive and archaeologically significant. These bowls were not accidental discoveries. They were found in large numbers inside elite tombs, sometimes stacked, sometimes arranged neatly among grave goods. Some are simple and smooth. Others are decorated with ridges, grooves, or fine lines. A few include narrow necks or flaring rims that would have been difficult to carve even in softer stone. The most striking examples are hollowed deeply from a single block, with curves so consistent that they appear almost machined. The question is not whether the Egyptians had machinery they did not. The question is how craftsmen, working with copper chisels, pounding stones, and abrasive sand, achieved such uniform results. To understand the workmanship, archaeologists study unfinished bowls from the same period. These incomplete pieces reveal grooves left by rotational tools, parallel scraping marks, and drill holes used for hollowing interiors. Together, they form a clear picture of the process. Craftsmen likely used bow-driven drills, tubular copper tools, and wooden shafts charged with quartz sand to remove stone slowly through grinding. The principle was simple: rotation plus abrasive equals controlled removal. Even so, shaping diorite or schist required patience. These stones are significantly harder than limestone or alabaster. They resist chiseling, fracture unpredictably, and wear down copper rapidly. To hollow a bowl from such material, craftsmen used repetitive drilling motions, gradually widening the cavity and smoothing the surface. The most revealing evidence comes from bowls abandoned mid-process. Some show circular grooves along the interior, the trace left by a rotating grinding tool. Others reveal shallow, concentric lines that indicate multiple stages of expansion. These marks are not decorative. They are the physical record of how the bowl was made. Bowls with extremely thin walls, sometimes only a few millimeters thick, required careful balancing. A single slip could break the piece, wasting weeks of work. The uniformity of wall thickness demonstrates that craftsmen constantly checked their progress, likely tapping the bowl to listen for changes in resonance or gauging thickness with simple calipers. The Saqqara bowls also provide insight into Egypt's early workshop organization. Many bowls were found in tombs belonging to high officials and elites. Their presence in large quantities suggests that specialized stoneworkers operated workshops dedicated to producing vessels for ceremonial and funerary use. The skills involved were passed down through practice rather than written instruction. Apprentices would have observed masters shaping stone step by step, learning how hard to press, how much abrasive to use, and how to keep rotation steady. Schist bowls, in particular, show a delicate touch. Schist is brittle and tends to split along layers. To shape it into a smooth, round vessel requires carefully aligning the grain and removing material with precision to avoid cracking. The bowls recovered from Saqqara demonstrate that craftsmen understood the properties of each stone and adapted their technique accordingly. The bowls also held symbolic meaning. Many are found in tombs meant to house elite individuals who played key roles in the early state. These vessels were likely used in rituals connected to offerings, purification, or status display. The quality of workmanship suggests that they were not everyday objects. They were prestige items, objects that represented skill, wealth, and connection to sacred traditions. Some bowls have rims so evenly carved that modern researchers use them to study ancient measurement and symmetry. Others have interiors polished to a soft sheen. This finishing required hours of rubbing with fine abrasive, smoothing the curves until no roughness remained. The process was not fast or easy. It was deliberate, controlled, and repetitive. Experimental archaeology shows that the precision seen in Saqqara bowls is achievable using simple tools, but only with extensive experience. Copper tools alone could not shape diorite or schist quickly. It was the abrasive quartz sand and powdered stone that did the work. Rotation turned the abrasive into a cutting agent. The craftsman guided the motion, maintained the angle, and managed the pressure. These bowls demonstrate that early dynastic Egyptians understood rotational stoneworking to a surprising degree. They used controlled, repetitive actions to create shapes that appear modern not because of lost machinery, but because the craftsmen applied consistent technique over long periods. In museum cases, the bowls often sit quietly, overshadowed by statues, gold jewelry, or painted coffins. Their scale is small, their surfaces are plain, but when examined closely, the details reveal a craft that required technical knowledge, patience, and a steady hand. Their precision does not point to unknown tools. It points to experienced workers who refined their craft over generations. The bowls also highlight how early this tradition developed. Long before the Great Pyramids, before large-scale temple complexes, before sophisticated bronze tools, Egyptians were already shaping stone vessels with remarkable accuracy. This early mastery laid the foundation for later achievements in sculpture, architecture, and ritual craftsmanship. The precision stone bowls of Saqqara show that technological sophistication in ancient Egypt was not limited to grand monuments. It existed in small objects as well, objects that required quiet skill rather than large labor forces. These bowls capture the discipline of early craftsmen, the structure of early workshops, and the subtle innovation that shaped some of Egypt's earliest material culture. Small, precise, and carefully made, they continue to remind us that ancient technology often appears in the simplest objects where skill, not machinery, defines the result. The blue faience chemical technology, long before the invention of modern ceramics, and long before glassmaking was fully mastered, the ancient Egyptians created a type of synthetic material unlike anything produced elsewhere at the time. It was bright, smooth, and intensely blue. It was called faience, a man-made glaze fused onto a quartz body, produced through deliberate chemistry more than 5,000 years ago. Egyptian faience is not pottery, it is not stone, it is not glass. It is a carefully engineered material created by heating crushed quartz, alkali salts, lime, and copper compounds until they fused into a glossy blue surface. The result was lightweight, durable, and visually striking. For the ancient Egyptians, the color blue was associated with water, rebirth, and divine power. Faience allowed them to produce this symbolic color in a bright, controlled, repeatable form. The technology appears as early as the pre-dynastic period. By the Old Kingdom, faience workshops existed near major temple complexes and administrative centers. The presence of broken molds, failed pieces, and raw materials indicates organized production rather than small household experimentation. 3 core techniques were used to create faience. 1. Efflorescence, mixing the quartz body with salts, so that, during heating, the glaze formed on the surface naturally as the salts migrated outward. 2. Cementation, burying the object in a surrounding mixture of glazed powder, which fused to its surface when fired. 3. Application glazing, brushing a liquid glaze onto a prepared surface before firing. The Egyptians knew each method produced slightly different results in texture, shine, and color. Their choice depended on the type of object they wanted: beads, tiles, amulets, cups, offering trays, or architectural elements. The key to faïence's blue color was copper. When copper compounds were heated with silica and alkali salts, they produced a turquoise or deep blue glaze. The tone could be adjusted with firing temperature and the amount of copper added. Even without written instructions, the consistency of faience color across centuries shows that craftsmen understood these variables through experience. At sites like Abydos, Amarna, Lisht, and Memphis, archaeologists have found extensive faience debris: piles of crushed quartz, fragments of kilns, molds for beads and amulets, bowls coated with leftover glaze, broken firing trays coated in blue residue. These remains reveal the industrial nature of faience production. Workers ground quartz into fine powder using stone mortars. They mixed it with natron, lime, and copper ore. They shaped it into forms, using molds or hand modeling. and they fired it in small kilns or open furnaces, using controlled heat. The firing process required careful attention. Temperatures too low produced dull, uneven surfaces, too high, and the glaze would bubble or run. The success of the final piece depended on steady heat, well-prepared fuel, and careful timing. The chemical reactions inside the kiln transformed the white quartz body into a blue-glazed object. This transformation fascinated the Egyptians. The process mirrored their religious ideas, raw material reborn into something radiant and pure. This symbolism made faience especially important in temples and tombs. Many faience objects found in Saqqara, Abydos, and Thebes were ritual items, blue amulets in the shape of frogs, eyes, and flowers, tiles used in royal palaces, small containers for oils or perfumes, offering trays, inlay pieces for furniture, shrines, and statues. The brightness of faience helped reflect light inside dim spaces, making ceremonial objects more visually striking. The most famous example of faience technology is the blue tiles from the Step Pyramid complex of Djoser. Thousands of faience tiles once lined corridors deep beneath the pyramid, creating a vivid, unreal environment of turquoise walls. These tiles show crisp edges, even glaze thickness, and consistent color proof of a sophisticated, organized workshop. Faience chemistry also developed over time. By the Middle Kingdom, Egyptians began producing deeper blues and greens by adjusting copper levels and adding iron or manganese. By the New Kingdom, faience workshops at Amarna produced objects on a massive scale, including large inlaid wall decorations, jewelry components, and ceremonial items for the royal household. Despite these developments, faience making remained labor-intensive. Each piece required grinding quartz, mixing ingredients, shaping the form, drying it slowly, and firing it with care. Workers had to control not only heat, but humidity, fuel type, and kiln airflow. The fact that so many faience objects survive intact shows how refined the process had become. The technology also had an economic dimension. Faience could imitate precious materials, like turquoise or lapis lazuli, at a fraction of the day cost. This allowed common people to own objects otherwise reserved for elites, while still maintaining symbolic value. Temple records show that faience was sometimes used in offerings when more expensive stones were unavailable. The science behind faience, its chemical reactions, vitrification, and color formation was not written in Egyptian texts, but the objects themselves document consistent understanding. Modern analysis using microscopy and chemical testing confirms that ancient craftsmen understood the ratios of silica to alkali, the required copper compounds, and the temperatures needed for successful firing. In this sense, faience represents one of the earliest examples of synthetic material engineering. The Egyptians were not simply heating stone, they were designing a new material by controlling chemical reactions. Walking into a museum today, the faience objects still glow with their deep blue color. They have not faded significantly over thousands of years. This stability reflects both the durability of the glaze and the precision of the production process. The blue faience chemical technology shows that ancient Egypt was not only a culture of stone and gold, it was also a culture of chemistry, careful experimentation, controlled heating, and material transformation. The brilliance of faience is not just in its color, but in the organized workshop system and technical knowledge behind it. 5,000 years ago, Egyptians were already mastering synthetic materials that required an understanding of heat, minerals, and chemical change. The result is a body of objects that still shine today, carrying the quiet legacy of craftsmen who worked with fire, quartz, and copper to create the first engineered glaze in human history. The antimicrobial natron formula. In the dry basins of ancient Egypt, long before the pyramids were built, a natural mixture of salts collected on the edges of evaporating lakes. It was a chalky, pale substance the Egyptians would eventually call natron, a blend of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, sodium chloride, and sodium sulfate. At first glance, it looked simple, but this single material would become one of the greatest chemical tools of the ancient world. Natron was the foundation of Egyptian mummification. It transformed bodies, stopped decay, and allowed the dead to remain intact for thousands of years. It did this not through magic, but through a remarkable set of properties: drying, disinfecting, and inhibiting bacterial activity. The ancient Egyptians discovered these effects gradually. Bodies buried naturally in desert sand desiccated quickly, remaining preserved in a way that suggested a path to immortality. Eventually, priests and embalmers learned that natron could produce the same effect in a controlled environment. By the Old Kingdom, mummification techniques had already become formalized, and natron played a central role. The natron used in mummification was collected from places like Wadi Natron in Lower Egypt. These dry lake beds produced large deposits during hot seasons. Workers scraped the crystallized material into baskets, transported it in bulk, and delivered it to embalmers' workshops. Natron's drying ability was crucial. When applied to a body, it pulled moisture out of tissues. Bacteria cannot survive without moisture. As the water left the body, decay slowed, then stopped. This natural desiccation became the heart of the embalming process. The standard treatment involved covering the body completely in natron for several weeks. Embalmers packed the material inside body cavities, around limbs, and beneath wrappings. They used fine granules for delicate areas and larger crystals for general drying. After 30 to 40 days, the body emerged thinner, dehydrated, and resistant to decay. But natron did more than remove water. Its alkaline nature created an environment hostile to bacteria and fungi. Its salts neutralized acids produced by early decomposition. Its chemical balance stabilized skin and soft tissue. This combination of properties preserved bodies with a reliability unmatched by any other ancient method. Textual references to natron appear in embalming instructions recorded in later periods. These texts describe measurements, timing, and the specific handling of different parts of the body. Though not all details survive, the consistency of mummified remains demonstrates that embalmers followed a systematic process. In addition to preserving bodies, natron served other roles in Egyptian daily life. It was used for cleaning, toothbrushing, temple purification rituals, and even in early soap mixtures. Its antibacterial effects made it valuable in all these contexts. In tombs, natron has been found stored in ceramic jars placed near embalming beds. Some jars contain residue that still tests chemically similar to deposits from Wadi Natron today. This continuity shows that the Egyptians were selective in their sourcing and understood the ideal composition for their purposes. The embalming process itself was more complex than simply applying natron. Bodies were washed, oils were applied, resins were used to seal cavities, and bandages were layered carefully. But none of these steps would have been effective without the initial drying and stabilizing effect of natron. It created the foundation on which the entire process depended. Archaeologists studying mummified remains note that the success of mummification varies by period. In times when natron quality was high and procedures were standardized, bodies remain remarkably intact. In periods when cheaper or diluted substitutes were used, preservation is less complete. This suggests that embalmers understood natron as a specific chemical formula, not a generic salt mixture. Microscopic studies of natron-treated tissues show minimal bacterial activity and little organic breakdown. Chemical analysis of mummies reveals salt residues impregnated deep into the skin layers. These residues contribute to long-term stability, preventing moisture absorption even centuries after burial. The embalmers who handled natron worked in specialized workshops. Archaeological finds from these workshops include drainage basins, wooden tables, clay jars, and tools associated with cutting and packing. Natron was often stored in heaps on the floor, sometimes mixed with plant fibers to adjust its texture. Workers reused the material after drying it in the sun, showing a practical approach to resource management. The quiet mystery surrounding natron lies not in unknown ingredients but in the precision of its application. Embalmers learned how much natron to use, how long to leave it, and how to adjust the formula for larger or smaller bodies. This knowledge was transmitted through practice rather than texts. The evenness of preservation across thousands of burials demonstrates a deep, consistent skill base. Natron's role extended beyond human mummification. Animals considered sacred cats, ibises, crocodiles were preserved using similar methods. This created massive demand for natron during certain periods, shaping trade routes and influencing regional economies. The Egyptians also understood natron's symbolic value. Its cleansing properties made it associated with purity and divine order. Priests used natron during temple rituals to wash statues, purify altars, and prepare sacred objects. Everyday Egyptians used diluted natron solutions to wash clothing or clean wounds. Despite its importance, Natron rarely appears in monumental inscriptions. Its presence is subtle, discovered mainly through chemical analysis, workshop remains, and burial context. Yet without natron, the Egyptian concept of an eternal physical form would not have been possible. Today, when we stand before a well-preserved mummy in a museum, we are looking at the result of a natural chemical formula applied with great understanding. Skin remains intact, hair still clings to the scalp, wrappings preserve the contours of the face. These details survive because natron halted decay at its earliest stage and created a stable environment for long-term preservation. The antimicrobial natron formula shows that ancient Egypt's achievements were not only architectural or artistic, they were also chemical, rooted in observation, experimentation, and the controlled use of natural materials. In a time without laboratories, Egyptians recognized how a mixture of salts could transform the physical world and secure the body for eternity. Their mastery of natron was both practical and symbolic, shaping a preservation technique that remains unmatched in longevity. It stands as one of the clearest examples of ancient science applied with intention, discipline, and remarkable effect. The reed pen writing technology. In the study of ancient Egypt, it is easy to focus on pyramids, statues, and temples. Yet one of the most influential tools of the civilization was small enough to hold in one hand the reed pen. With nothing more than a sharpened stalk of river reed, Egyptians developed a writing instrument that produced clean, controlled lines on papyrus for more than 3,000 years. It was simple in appearance, but sophisticated in its function. The reed pen, known as a calamus, was typically made from the hollow stems of plants that grew along the Nile. The ideal reed had a strong outer layer, a straight internal structure, and a natural elasticity that allowed it to hold ink without collapsing. Workers harvested the reeds, dried them, and trimmed them into short lengths. One end was cut into a sharp, chisel-like tip. This angled tip created the distinctive strokes of Egyptian hieratic and hieroglyphic writing. The process of shaping the pen required precision. A knife was used to slice the reed at specific angles. The inner fibers were scraped out to form a small reservoir that could hold ink. Craftsmen sometimes hardened the tip over gentle heat to improve durability. When the pen met the papyrus surface, it delivered ink evenly, creating thin vertical lines and broad horizontal strokes depending on the angle of the writer's hand. The writing style of Egypt, flowing, consistent, and visually balanced, relied entirely on the performance of this tool. Ink was prepared separately. Scribes mixed soot, or red ochre, with water and gum, Arabic. The soot-based black ink produced deep, matte lines. The ochre-based red ink was used for headings, corrections, or emphasis. Reed pens held this ink through capillary action. When pressed lightly to papyrus, the ink transferred cleanly, without blotting. Papyrus, the surface most commonly used for writing, had a slightly textured grain. The reed pen's chisel tip interacted well with this surface. It allowed scribes to write quickly, without tearing the sheet. The efficiency of this combination, reed pen and papyrus, helped shape Egyptian administration, literature, religion, and daily life. Scribes trained extensively to master these tools. Their training began in childhood, using scrap papyrus and potsherds. Students learned how to cut and maintain reed pens, how to mix ink, and how to produce consistent strokes. Their practice sheets show row after row of repeated symbols, each one reflecting control of angle, pressure, and ink flow. Well-made reed pens did not last long. They wore down with use. Scribes sharpened them repeatedly using small knives carried in writing kits. Many writing palettes found in tombs include grooves filled with dried ink and recesses for holding multiple reed pens. These kits also contained knives, water pots, and spare reeds. A working scribe often carried several pens of different widths to adjust line thickness or write at different scales. The reed pen was central not only to administration but also to religious life. Temple accounts, ritual instructions, medical papyri, and funerary texts were all written with these pens. The care with which scribes handled their tools reflects the importance of writing in Egyptian culture. Written words were not simply records, they were believed to carry power. A name written clearly was a name preserved. Some of the finest surviving manuscripts, the Book of the Dead, papyri, wisdom texts, hymns, medical scrolls, show an astonishing level of control. The lines are straight, the spacing is consistent. The strokes vary subtly in thickness, creating a rhythm that feels intentional and balanced. These visual qualities are not accidents of survival. They reflect a deep understanding of how reed pens behaved on papyrus. Archaeological finds confirm the widespread use of reed pens. Excavations at workers' villages, administrative centers, and tombs have uncovered broken pen fragments, pallets, ink cakes, and discarded writing scraps. In scribal schools, waste piles contain hundreds of practice pieces, showing early attempts at forming letters. These pieces help researchers understand the learning curve behind the craft. Although reed pens appear simple, maintaining them required knowledge. If the tip split, ink would blot. If the angle was wrong, lines became uneven. If the reed dried out, it lost flexibility. Scribes adjusted their tools constantly. They sharpened them during writing sessions. They controlled ink consistency by adding water drop by drop. The balance between pen, ink, and papyrus required familiarity built over years of practice. The reed pen also influenced Egyptian script design. Hieratic, the everyday cursive script, developed its sloping, connected forms because the pen produced clean strokes in those directions. Even hieroglyphs, usually carved in stone, originated from forms shaped first with ink on papyrus. In this way, the reed pen indirectly shaped the visual language of Egypt's monumental inscriptions. Some reed pens found in tombs belonged to high-ranking scribes and officials. Their inclusion in burials reflects the belief that writing skills were essential even in the afterlife. A scribe's tools were not just functional, they were symbols of status and education. The simplicity of the reed pen made it accessible, yet its mastery required discipline. Egyptian writing remained remarkably consistent over centuries because the tool itself placed natural limits and guided stylistic choices. The controlled strokes prevented excessive flourish. The regular angle of the tip encouraged uniform shapes. The interaction with papyrus maintained a steady pace of writing. Modern researchers studying ancient manuscripts find that the best handwriting comes from periods when scribal training was strongest. The pen, driven by a skilled hand, produced texts with clarity that still impress readers today. In museum collections, reed pens rarely receive attention. They are small, fragile, often overlooked beside larger artifacts, but their impact is enormous. Without them, Egypt's administrative system would not have functioned. Its literature would not have flourished. Its religious texts would not have been preserved. The reed pen writing technology shows that innovation is sometimes modest in appearance. A hollow reed, sharpened at one end, paired with papyrus and soot-based ink, became one of the most influential tools in human history. It preserved laws, myths, prayers, calculations, and memories across millennia. And in the clean lines drawn by these simple pens, we still see the hands of scribes who shaped the written world of ancient Egypt quietly, precisely, stroke by stroke. The copper chisels that shouldn't work. In discussions about ancient Egyptian stonework, one question appears again and again. How did craftsmen shape granite, a stone, harder than their tools, using copper chisels? It is a fair question. Copper is soft. Granite is dense and filled with hard quartz crystals. At first glance, the combination seems impossible. Yet across Egypt, from Old Kingdom sarcophagi to temple lintels and statue bases, shaped granite surfaces show clear evidence of Egyptian workmanship long before iron tools existed. The puzzle is not about unknown machines or missing metals. The answer lies in technique, the combination of copper chisels, stone hammers, and abrasive sand used in a coordinated, repetitive process. Copper itself could not cut granite directly. When pressed against quartz, the metal deforms. But Egyptian craftsmen understood this limitation. They used copper chisels only at specific stages, and always in combination with tools made from harder stones, such as dolerite pounding balls. The chisels shaped softer areas, cleaned edges, or worked after abrasion had weakened the surface. The real cutting power came from abrasives. Quartz sand, abundant along the Nile, has a hardness almost equal to granite's quartz content. When sand is placed between a tool and the stone surface, the quartz particles grind the granite in tiny increments. Copper chisels acted as holders for this abrasive. They carried the sand into the work area, allowing quartz grains to do the actual cutting. This explains why ancient chisels have heavily worn edges. The metal was constantly reshaped and sharpened because the abrasive sand eroded it during use. In quarries around Aswan, archaeologists find dolerite balls, heavy, hard hammerstones used for rough shaping. These pounding stones bruise the granite surface. breaking down crystalline structure and creating shallow depressions. Next came the chisels and abrasive slurry, which refined the shape. Unfinished granite statues and blocks give the clearest testimony. Some show large pits from pounding stones. Others display straight, parallel grooves made by copper chisels working with abrasives. Even deeper surfaces reveal small pockets where sand was trapped and gradually ground the granite. This layered method required teams of workers, each performing repetitive movements. Granite was not shaped quickly, it was shaped slowly, grain by grain. Copper chisels took many forms. Broad chisels for leveling surfaces, narrow chisels for cutting edges, pointed chisels for finishing details, curved chisels for bowl and cavity shaping. Most chisels were hammered frequently to restore their cutting edges. Workshops found near quarry sites contain piles of worn-down tools, reshaping hammers, and fragments of broken chisels. This evidence shows that chisels were consumables used, worn, hammered, and reshaped dozens of times. At Saqqara and Giza, where granite elements appear in limestone temples, tool marks confirm the multi-step process. Flat chisel marks appear only after surfaces were first roughened with pounding stones and abrasives. Inscriptions carved into granite show that artisans used both chisels and copper saws charged with sand. Granite saws from Egypt were not metal blades cutting directly. They were simple copper strips, pulled back and forth with abrasive slurry lodged beneath. The sand did the work. The copper provided structure and shape. This principle applies to chisels as well. The metal guided the abrasive, but never cut the granite by itself. Experimental archaeology has reproduced these results. Modern researchers using copper chisels, dolerite hammers, and quartz sand have successfully carved granite blocks, created straight edges, and produced flat surfaces similar to ancient examples. The process is slow, often taking days for small features, but it works, and it produces tool marks identical to those found on ancient monuments. The debate surrounding copper chisels often comes from modern expectations of speed and efficiency. We imagine workshops needing to produce large quantities quickly, but ancient craftsmen worked with time, not deadlines. Weeks spent shaping a statue base was acceptable. Months spent smoothing a sarcophagus interior was normal. Their goal was durability and symbolic perfection, not rapid output. Granite's resistance actually contributed to its value. It symbolized permanence, endurance, and solar power. Kings chose granite for thresholds, shrines, sarcophagi, and statues because it was difficult to shape. The difficulty gave it meaning. Workers respected the material. Their techniques developed from long observation rather than formula. Experienced craftsmen knew how hard to strike, how much sand to add, and when to switch from pounding to abrasion. In some places, such as the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, the evidence is frozen in place. Channels carved along the sides show where pounding stones were used. Narrow cuts reveal where chisels and sand widened cracks. The obelisk itself remains partially separated from its bedrock, capturing a moment of ancient labor. The surfaces are uneven, worn, and scratched exactly what one expects from a manual process, not a mechanized one. Inside temples, granite inscriptions reveal even more. The hieroglyphs were often carved after the stone was set in place. Chisels, guided carefully by hand, shaped delicate lines inside quartz crystals. This required control, patience, and repeated sharpening. These inscriptions show shallow V-shaped grooves consistent with copper chisels, not deeper cuts from harder metals. Their profiles match those reproduced in experimental tests. The quiet mystery of copper chisels is not how they worked, it is how craftsmen achieved such skill with them. The tools were simple, the material was difficult, but the technique was refined over generations. Modern replicas demonstrate that Egyptians could carve sharp edges, smooth surfaces, and deep cavities in granite, using nothing more than dolerite hammerstones, copper chisels, abrasive sand, water, rhythmic, repeated labor, and this combination left behind exactly the tool marks found today. The copper chisels that shouldn't work remind us of something essential about ancient technology. Limitations did not stop innovation. Egyptian craftsmen used the materials available to them with remarkable adaptability. They understood stone tactilely through sound, vibration, resistance, and dust. Their mastery was not mechanical, but human. In the quiet surfaces of carved granite, their work remains still visible, still sharp, and still reflecting the skill of hands that shaped one of the hardest stones on earth with patience rather than force. The 5000 Yearold Brewery Complex at Abydos. In the desert north of Abydos, at a site tied to some of Egypt's earliest kings, archaeologists uncovered a discovery that reshaped the understanding of ancient industry. Stretching across the sand were the remains of a vast brewery complex, a facility capable of producing beer on a scale unimaginable for its time. Built more than 5,000 years ago, during Egypt's early dynastic period, this installation represents one of the oldest known examples of industrial mass production anywhere in the world. The brewery did not look like a modern factory. It lacked walls, chimneys, or equipment recognizable to today's visitor. But the layout was unmistakable. The site contained long rectangular rooms, each lined with large ceramic vats arranged in orderly rows. Burn marks on the ground showed where fires once heated the mash. Layers of ancient residue clinging to the pots revealed traces of barley, emmer, wheat, and other grains used in the brewing process. The scale of the installation was clear: dozens of vats in multiple chambers, each chamber producing large quantities of beer in a single batch. Beer was central to life in ancient Egypt. It was a staple of daily diet, a source of nutrition, and a form of payment for workers. It appeared in religious offerings, funerary rituals, and temple provisions. But the scale of the Abydos brewery goes far beyond the needs of a village or even a royal household. Archaeologists estimate that the site could produce thousands of liters per batch. This suggests a purpose tied to large gatherings, elite ceremonies, or state-sponsored events. Abydos itself was a royal center. It was the burial place of early kings, including rulers of Egypt's first dynasties. The brewery's location near these ceremonial zones indicates that it served ritual activities on a large scale. Early Egyptian kings performed funerary ceremonies that involved offerings of food and drink, including beer. These ceremonies required significant amounts of provisions, especially during royal festivals or burial rituals that involved large groups of attendants, priests, and workers. The design of the brewery shows careful planning. Each rectangular unit contained 2 long rows of clay vats set into shallow pits. The pits allowed controlled heating of the vessels using small fires. This method produced a warm, steady temperature essential for fermenting grain mixtures. By alternating between heating phases and cooling phases, brewers created a thick mash that would eventually ferment into beer. The uniformity seen across multiple rooms suggests a standardized process. This was not trial and error. It was a repeated method carried out by trained workers. Analysis of residue inside the vats reveals the composition of the mash. Barley and emmer wheat formed the base. Water was added, and the mixture was gently heated. Plant sugars broke down, and yeast naturally present in the live environment began the fermentation process. The resulting beer was not like modern varieties. It was thicker, lower in alcohol, and filled with nutrients. It functioned as both food and drink, making it essential for workers and common households. But the Abydos brewery stands apart because of its volume and organization. The facility likely operated under royal authority. Workshops of this scale required resources, labor, and administrative coordination. The presence of early dynastic tombs nearby supports the idea that the beer was intended for large-scale ritual contexts associated with kingship. Some archaeologists propose that the brewery supplied funerary complexes during the reign of King Narmer or his successors. Others suggest it supported periodic festivals that brought together thousands of participants. Work at the site was labor-intensive. Brewing required grinding grain, preparing mash, heating vats, and monitoring fermentation. Teams of workers likely rotated through the complex, maintaining fires and checking temperatures by experience rather than written instructions. Ceramic vessels had to be replaced or repaired regularly. The presence of broken pottery fragments scattered around the site indicates ongoing maintenance. This was a functioning industrial area, busy with activity and sustained by skilled labor. The large scale of the Abydos brewery hints at broader social organization. Large quantities of beer meant large-scale grain cultivation. This suggests that agricultural production, storage, and distribution were coordinated to supply the brewery. The appearance of such an organized, centralized facility during Egypt's early dynastic period shows how quickly the state developed mechanisms for resource management. Beer production was not just a household craft, it became an early industry tied directly to political and religious institutions. The discovery of the brewery also changes how archaeologists view early Egyptian technology. While stone monuments often dominate popular imagination, installations like this reveal mastery of heat control, resource allocation, and standardized production long before advanced architectural achievements. The workers who managed the vats needed to understand how temperature affected fermentation. Their consistency across dozens of vessels shows that they developed practical knowledge through experience, likely passed down within specialized groups. Inside the brewing chambers, the environment would have been warm, humid, and filled with the smell of fermenting grain. Workers tended fires and stirred mixtures with wooden paddles. Water was carried in jars from nearby sources. The process required coordination and constant attention. In many ways, the brewery was the operational heart behind rituals carried out in the nearby royal enclosures. Without its output, ceremonies involving large numbers of people would not have been possible. When archaeologists examined the layout, they noted that each chamber was built to the same proportions. The spacing of vats was consistent. The pits were carved with similar depth and width. This uniformity suggests that the builders followed a blueprint, whether formal or memorized. It also indicates that the method of brewing was standardized across multiple workspaces. Nothing about the design appears accidental. Even the arrangement of rooms implies workflow: grain preparation, heating, fermentation, and storage. Standing at the site today, the rectangular pits appear as shallow impressions in the sand. The once massive vats are mostly broken, their fragments scattered across the ground. Yet, the structure is clear enough that the original function is unmistakable. It is one of the earliest examples of mass production on record, long before the concept of industrialization existed. The 5,000-year-old brewery complex at Abydos demonstrates that early Egypt was not only a society of builders, artists, and priests. It was also a society capable of organizing large-scale production, coordinating labor, and creating standardized processes. The brewery supported rituals, fed workers, and demonstrated administrative capacity at a time when writing was still new and the state was taking shape. Beer from this complex is long gone, but the remnants of its production, the vats, the residue, the layout, remain as evidence of a world where technology, labor, and ritual converged. The result is a site that reveals the practical foundations behind early kingship, not only monuments, but the infrastructure that supported human gatherings on a massive scale. The golden spearheads of Thutmose III, among the buried caches of the New Kingdom, amid chests of ceremonial weapons and tools sealed beneath temple floors. Archaeologists have uncovered an unusual set of objects attributed to the reign of Thutmose III. These are the golden spearheads, weapons that combine symbolic meaning with high craftsmanship, produced during a period when Egypt's military power expanded dramatically. They are small in number, beautifully formed, and almost untouched by time, preserved as part of royal offerings placed in hidden deposits around Karnak and other ritual sites. The spearheads are not solid gold weapons intended for battle. Their cores are usually made of bronze, shaped carefully into pointed blades before being fitted with gold sheaths or inlays. The gold surfaces are smooth, even, and remarkably thin, applied with enough skill that they cover the underlying metal without visible hammer marks. These objects were not functional weapons. They were ceremonial part of the royal equipment used in rituals of kingship, victory, and divine protection. The association with Thutmose III, one of Egypt's most successful warrior kings, gives them particular importance. His reign marked a period of repeated military campaigns into Canaan, Syria, and beyond, expanding Egyptian influence farther than any earlier pharaoh. The golden spearheads found in temple caches reflect the symbolic narrative of that era. The king, as military leader, protector of Egypt, and chosen champion of the gods. The caches where these weapons were discovered tell us how they were used. Archaeologists located them within hidden foundation deposits beneath temple precincts. These deposits often contained miniature tools, metal blades, ceramic vessels, and ritual objects placed as offerings to protect the structure. Among them, the golden spearheads served as representations of royal power, extending into the sacred realm. Their burial beneath temple floors suggest that they were offerings to deities rather than practical equipment. The workmanship of the spearheads is a major point of study. Gold is a soft metal, easy to shape but difficult to maintain in precise forms, especially when applied over bronze. Yet the spearheads show sharply defined edges, straight shafts, and uniform thickness. Metal workers achieved this by creating thin gold sheets, heating them to the point where they could be shaped without cracking, and fitting them over carefully prepared cores. The seams were burnished until nearly invisible, leaving a smooth, unified surface. Some spearheads include decorative elements such as incised lines, embossed patterns, or small hieroglyphic inscriptions, naming Thutmose III, or invoking divine protection. The inscriptions are shallow but crisp, indicating that the gold surface was engraved after application, not before. This required steady hands and fine tools capable of cutting into gold without damaging the bronze beneath. The context of these objects also sheds light on the structure of royal workshops during the New Kingdom. Goldsmiths and metalworkers operated in temple-affiliated institutions, producing ritual equipment under controlled conditions. Records from later periods describe workshops associated with Amun's temples, staffed by craftsmen who specialized in gold, silver, bronze, and electrum. Although texts from Thutmose III's time are fewer, the surviving spearheads demonstrate that similar systems were already in place. The spearheads also highlight Egypt's extensive access to gold during the New Kingdom. Campaigns into Nubia secured large quantities of this metal. Tribute lists from conquered territories record gold ingots, gold dust, and finished golden objects presented to the pharaoh. This supply enabled craftsmen to use gold in ritual equipment without restriction, creating items intended for symbolic purposes rather than economic value. In studying the spearheads, scholars also examine their role in foundation rites. Egyptian kings placed objects beneath temples as protective offerings. These items represented tools, weapons, and symbols that ensured the building's integrity and the god's favor. A golden spearhead, in this context, symbolized strength, authority, and the pharaoh's role as protector of cosmic order. The objects themselves carry no signs of use. Their edges are clean, their surfaces unblemished, and their points show no impact damage. They were created purely for ceremonial placement. Their preservation in sealed caches allowed them to survive in near-perfect condition, providing a rare glimpse into the craftsmanship of the 18th dynasty. The spearheads also reveal something about the ideology of Thutmose III's reign. His military victories were celebrated in temple inscriptions, reliefs, and annual festivals. Ritual weapons placed in temple deposits were part of this larger narrative. They represented the king's strength not in battlefield terms but in ritual symbolism, linking his earthly power to divine protection. Archaeologists examining the caches note the deliberate arrangement of objects. The spearheads were placed alongside other miniature tools, chisels, axes, and arrowheads, forming a symbolic toolkit of royal authority. This collection represented the king's capacity to build, to protect, and to maintain Egypt's stability. The inclusion of gold emphasized permanence and purity, qualities associated with divine materials. The metallurgy behind the spearheads also offers insight. Bronze cores were cast using established methods, pouring molten bronze into molds, refining the shape through hammering, and smoothing the surface before applying gold. The gold sheets were prepared through repeated hammering and heating, gradually thinned to precise measurements. Attaching gold to bronze required experience. If heated too much, the gold would warp. If applied too cold, it would crack during burnishing. The final results show an advanced understanding of metal behavior. In museum collections, these spearheads often appear small and understated. They lack the elaborate decoration seen on larger ritual weapons, yet their refinement shows the technical skill present in New Kingdom workshops. Each object reflects hours of careful shaping, engraving, and polishing, performed by specialists who worked for temples and the royal household. Their significance is strengthened by their rarity. Only a handful have been found from Thutmose III's reign, and each was discovered in a context that confirms its ritual function. These are not mass-produced items. They were crafted intentionally for specific ceremonial deposits. The golden spearheads of Thutmose III tell a story not of warfare, but of ritual, symbolism, and the relationship between kingship and craftsmanship. They represent the fusion of political authority and religious obligation, a king offering the symbols of his power to the gods who legitimized his rule. Their surfaces are still bright today, shaped by craftsmen whose work was meant to be hidden, placed in the foundation of temples to remain unseen forever. And yet, after thousands of years, the spearheads continue to speak quietly of the precision and intention that defined the artistry of Egypt's golden age. The lost stone saw marks of Giza across the Giza Plateau, in quarry areas and unfinished architectural zones. Archaeologists have documented a set of markings carved into hard stone surfaces that continue to raise questions about ancient Egyptian stoneworking. These are the radial saw marks, long, slightly curved grooves cut through granite blocks, some appearing on unfinished pieces left behind in quarries or in abandoned architectural elements. The markings are distinctive. They are straight or gently arced lines, spaced evenly, and carved cleanly into stone that is among the hardest used in ancient construction. These traces have become important clues to understanding how Egyptians shaped granite during the Old Kingdom. The marks appear on granite blocks associated with pyramid temples and causeways, especially around Giza and Aswan. They are not decorative, and they do not result from natural erosion. They represent deliberate cutting, created during the stone reduction process. What makes them striking is their regularity. The grooves follow consistent widths and depths, suggesting a tool that moved in a repeated back-and-forth motion with controlled force. Evidence points to a straightforward explanation. The Egyptians used copper saws, weighted or tensioned, combined with abrasive quartz sand and water. The copper itself was not the cutting edge. Instead, the saw acted as a carrier for the abrasive material. As the saw moved, the quartz particles harder than granite cut into the stone, producing the familiar saw marks that survive today. This method is supported by discoveries at workshop sites, where long copper saw blades have been found, along with fragments of quartz sand fused into ancient slurry residue. The saws were simple in design: long strips of copper, sometimes several meters in length, pulled back and forth by teams of workers or by wooden handles. The motion was repetitive, guided by experience rather than machinery. The key insight is that the curvature of some grooves, the radial appearance, comes not from mechanical rotation, but from the natural movement of the saw itself. When a long copper blade bends slightly under tension, the cut curves. This effect is subtle but visible. The ancient marks match this pattern: long, shallow arcs rather than perfectly straight mechanical cuts. Unfinished granite blocks at Giza provide the clearest evidence. A few display deep channels where a copper saw was started but the cut was abandoned. The grooves inside these channels show parallel lines created by abrasive grains trapped beneath the copper strip. Some grooves widen slightly toward the bottom, consistent with a saw blade that shifted angle during use. These details show human technique, not mechanical systems. The process of sawing granite was slow. Workers used wooden frames to steady the saw, maintaining a straight line across the stone surface. Sand was added regularly to refresh the abrasive layer. Water kept the mixture fluid, reducing friction and helping distribute the cutting grains. As the saw moved back and forth, the sand ate into the stone, creating the long grooves still visible today. Because granite is so hard, the abrasive needed constant replenishment. Archaeological sampling of ancient saw slurry reveals a mixture of quartz, feldspar, and trace copper particles. The copper wore down quickly, requiring frequent sharpening or replacement. This explains why copper saw fragments appear in quarry debris fields. The radial saw marks raise quiet questions mostly because they are so clean. The grooves are surprisingly straight. Their spacing is consistent. Their depth indicates patient, repetitive effort. They resemble the effect of modern stoneworking in some ways, though produced entirely by manual labor. Experimental archaeology supports this interpretation. Modern researchers have recreated similar cuts in granite using copper saw blades and quartz sand. The resulting grooves match ancient saw marks closely. Parallel lines, subtle arcs from blade bending, depth patterns influenced by abrasive concentration, uneven ends where the cut stopped. This consistency reinforces the idea that ancient workers used simple tools effectively. The saw marks also reveal the scale of effort involved. Granite blocks used in temple floors, casing stones, and architectural elements required long, straight cuts. Teams of workers likely stood on either side of the saw, pulling alternately to create continuous motion. The process could take days for a single, deep cut. But the result was a flat, controlled surface that could then be shaped with pounding stones, chisels, and polishing abrasives. Some granite elements at Giza show multiple types of tool marks on the same surface. A block might display saw marks on one side, chisel marks on another, and dolerite pitting on a third. This layering shows how different tools were used in sequence. Sawing created straight planes. Pounding stones removed excess material. Chisels refined edges. Abrasion polished surfaces. The radial saw marks appear primarily on pieces left unfinished or damaged during construction. Completed blocks often have polished surfaces that obscure earlier tool traces. This makes the unfinished examples especially valuable for understanding technique. They preserve the early stages of stone preparation that are rarely visible on finished monuments. The location of these pieces, often near temple causeways, quarries, or storage pits, suggests that they were part of a larger workflow. Blocks were partially shaped at quarries, transported to construction sites, and finished on location. When a block cracked or proved unusable, it was abandoned, leaving behind saw marks that survived erosion. The quiet mystery surrounding these marks stems not from uncertainty about the tools, but from the level of coordination required. Producing long, straight saw cuts in granite is physically demanding. It requires trained laborers, stable support structures, and a consistent supply of abrasive sand. This reveals an organized system of stoneworking in the Old Kingdom, with teams of specialists who understood the behavior of granite and the limits of their tools. What the saw marks ultimately show is not lost technology, but skilled technique. The Egyptians did not need harder metals or advanced machinery. They used the materials available to them, copper, sand, wood, and muscle, with remarkable discipline. Standing beside an unfinished granite block at Giza today, the grooves appear almost modern. They run with quiet precision across the surface, evidence of a story frozen in stone. Not a story of machines, but of workers repeating the same motion hour after hour, guided by experience, shaping the hardest stone available to them, using nothing more than simple tools and patient technique. The lost stone saw marks of Giza remind us that ancient engineering often leaves its most honest traces not in finished monuments, but in the incomplete efforts that never reached completion. These grooves remain as direct fingerprints of the people who built Giza's steady hands, repetitive labor, and an understanding of stone that has endured across millennia. The Bronze Age LOCKANDKEY system. In the remains of ancient Egyptian houses and storage rooms, archaeologists have uncovered a technology that feels unexpectedly modern. The world's earliest known lock and key system. Dating back more than 3,500 years, these devices were made not of metal but of wood, and yet they used the same principles found in modern pin tumbler locks, a mechanical system designed to secure doors, control access, and protect property in an era long before iron keys or metal bolts became common. The locks were simple in material but sophisticated in design. A wooden bolt slid horizontally into a door frame. Inside this bolt were vertical cavities drilled with precision, each cavity containing a small wooden pin. The matching key, also carved from wood, had raised pegs on its upper surface. When inserted into a keyhole on the outside of the door, the key lifted the internal pins to the correct height. Only when all pins were raised simultaneously could the bolt slide open. This mechanism is remarkably similar to the pin tumbler system still used today. Its invention in Bronze Age Egypt shows a level of mechanical understanding that is often overlooked in discussions of ancient technology. Documentation of these locks comes from multiple sites across the Nile Valley. Excavations at Deir el-Medina, Thebes, and smaller settlements reveal doors fitted with lock housings carved from wood. Some locks remain intact enough to show the alignment of pins and the path of the bolt. In other places, only fragments survive: key pieces with worn pegs, wooden bolts with drilled holes, and door frames with carved slots for locking mechanisms. The scale of the locks varies. Some were large, suitable for storage rooms or granaries where food supplies needed protection. Others were small, used for chests or private household doors. The consistent design shows that the technology was standardized and widely adopted, not a rare or experimental device. The workings of the lock were entirely mechanical. The pins rested by gravity inside the bolt. When the bolt was closed, the pins dropped into holes carved in the surrounding frame, securing the door. The key lifted these pins while simultaneously pushing the bolt back. This combination of lifting and sliding required careful coordination of shape, spacing, and alignment. The presence of these locks reveals details about daily life in ancient Egypt. They show that people valued privacy, security, and controlled access, not only for state institutions, but also within households. In settlements, like Deir el-Medina, where workers lived in close quarters, personal belongings needed to be protected. The existence of locks demonstrates that ownership of goods mattered and that households took practical measures to secure them. The craftsmanship required to make such locks was considerable. Carpenters needed to drill perfectly aligned holes through wooden bolts. Pin diameters had to match the key's pegs exactly. Woodworkers carved keys to fit specific locks. Keys were not interchangeable. This indicates that carpentry specialists produced these devices as part of their trade, likely working in village workshops or temple support facilities. Some of the best preserved examples were found in tombs, where complete wooden tools and household objects survived in dry conditions. These locks, although not used for burial security, show the same structure as those found in everyday settlements. Their presence in tombs also suggests that people saw locks as part of daily life, important enough to accompany them into the afterlife. The materials used were practical rather than decorative. Egyptians chose hardwoods like acacia, sycamore, or tamarisk for durability. Keys were carved from the same woods, often smoothed by repeated handling. Even though metal was available during the Bronze Age, wood remained the preferred material because it was easier to shape into complex forms and cheaper to replace. The mechanical principle behind the locks reflects an understanding of simple machines, the relationship between movement, alignment, and controlled obstruction. Lifting pins to free a bolt is a precise action, requiring the key and lock to be designed as matched parts. This means locks had to be individually crafted and customized, a process that required steady hands and careful planning. The technology also suggests that theft or unauthorized access were concerns in Egyptian communities. While the society was highly organized, with strong administrative structures, the need for locks indicates recognition of personal boundaries and security within daily life. Granaries, storage rooms, and private chambers all used locking systems to manage access. Some archaeologists see in these locks the beginnings of property management in the ancient world. A lock was not only a physical barrier, it was a symbol of control. Possessing the key meant possessing authority over a space or its contents. This dynamic appears not only in households, but also in temples and administrative buildings, where access to storerooms or ritual items was restricted. The lock and key system developed gradually. The earliest forms were simple sliding bolts. Later examples incorporated multiple pins, creating more secure mechanisms. This evolution shows experimentation and refinement, traits of a technological tradition carried through generations of craftsmen. Modern reconstructions of ancient Egyptian locks have confirmed their effectiveness. When built to historically accurate specifications, the locks function smoothly, lifting pins with surprising precision, even after repeated use. The durability of the original devices, many of which survived thousands of years, confirms the reliability of the design. The quiet mystery in these locks does not lie in unknown tools or lost technologies. It lies in how such a sophisticated concept emerged so early. The idea of raising internal pins with a matching key, a concept still foundational to modern security, appears fully formed in the archaeological record of the Bronze Age. There is no earlier prototype. The system appears as a complete invention, already refined, suggesting that carpenters developed it through practical problem-solving rather than written theory. The Bronze Age lock and key system shows that ancient Egyptian innovation extended far beyond monumental construction. It reached into households, storage rooms, and daily routines, quiet spaces where technology shaped ordinary life. These small wooden devices, simple in appearance yet mechanically elegant, stand as reminders that ancient engineering was not limited to stone and metal. It also existed in the subtle mechanisms designed to protect, control, and organize the world of those who lived along the Nile. The ancient, blast furnace kilns, across the archaeological sites of ancient Egypt, especially in the desert margins where wind carries heat across open plains. Researchers have uncovered the remains of kilns that once reached temperatures far higher than those required for ordinary pottery. These installations, sometimes buried beneath layers of ash, broken ceramics, and vitrified clay, reveal a technology capable of producing sustained high heat, suitable for advanced ceramics, faience, and specialized materials. Because of their efficiency and unusual structure, some archaeologists refer to them informally as blast furnace kilns, not because they match the iron furnaces of later centuries, but because their airflow and heat concentration achieved levels surprisingly high for their time. These kilns worked on a simple principle: controlling air, fuel, and chamber design to create temperatures well above 900–1,000 degrees Celsius, and in some cases potentially reaching 1,100 degrees Celsius or more. Such temperatures were necessary for producing faience glazes, certain ceramic vessels, and industrial materials used in ritual equipment. What makes these kilns remarkable is their ability to sustain heat rather than merely generate brief spikes. This required an understanding of airflow, venting, and fuel management knowledge gained through long practice and experimentation. Archaeologists have found kiln sites across Egypt, from Memphis and Amarna to Elephantine and the Fayum. Many follow a similar design: circular or oval firing chambers dug into the ground, lined with thick clay walls hardened by repeated use. Beneath the main chamber lie fire tunnels, where fuel was fed continuously. These tunnels allowed hot air to rise into the firing area, while ash and cooler air remained below. The separation of fire source and firing chamber is one of the defining features of higher temperature kilns. The walls of these kilns tell much of the story. Clay surfaces often show layers of vitrification, glossy patches formed when extreme heat melted the inner lining. This is clear evidence that craftsmen were producing temperatures higher than ordinary household ovens or simple pits. The presence of such vitrified layers appears repeatedly, suggesting that high heat firings were an established part of Egyptian production. Fuel choice also played a central role. Egypt lacked large forests, so craftsmen used materials like acacia wood, tamarisk branches, dried animal dung, and plant stalks. These fuels burn quickly and produce intense heat when supplied with steady airflow. To maintain temperature, workers fed fuel into the lower chambers continuously while regulating air through upper vents. This required constant attention, making kiln operation a specialized task carried out by trained workers. Many kilns include small openings on their sides or at the top. These acted as vents or observation points. Craftsmen monitored color changes inside the chamber, which indicated temperature shifts. The glow of pottery, the color of flames, and the behavior of glaze mixtures provided the only indicators available. These observations guided adjustments in fuel feeding, vent closure, and firing duration. Faience production demanded particularly careful control. The glaze on faience objects formed when silica, natron, copper compounds, and lime fused under high heat. If the kiln overheated, the glaze would run or bubble. If the temperature was too low, the glaze would appear dull or incomplete. This sensitivity meant that kiln workers developed a precise understanding of heating cycles. They learned how long to maintain specific temperatures, how to control oxygen levels, and how different types of fuel affected firing behavior. Some of the most sophisticated kilns were discovered at Amarna, where workshops associated with the royal household produced large quantities of faience tiles, beads, inlays, and ritual objects. The layout of these workshops includes firing chambers, drying areas, and ash disposal zones, all tightly integrated. The consistency of faience pieces from Amarna suggests that craftsmen achieved repeatable results, a sign of advanced kiln management. Kilns also played a role in producing ceramic vessels used for storage, transport, ritual offerings, and daily activities. Large storage jars, for example, required long firing times to ensure even heating throughout thick walls. The kilns discovered near workshop sites show that Egyptians mastered both small faience firings and large-scale pottery production in the same technological tradition. Archaeological layers around kiln sites often contain ash dumps, broken wasters, and discarded tools. These waste piles provide insight into the frequency and scale of firing events. Some sites reveal hundreds of broken pieces, suggesting continuous production rather than occasional firings. This level of activity points to organized industry, whether for temple supply, royal workshops, or community needs. One intriguing feature of Egyptian kilns is the use of draft system structures designed to draw air through the firing chamber without mechanical assistance. Some kilns were placed on elevated ground where prevailing winds helped feed the fire. Others incorporated tall chimneys or elongated tunnels to encourage airflow. This method mimics the principles of later blast furnaces, though it developed independently and was adapted to local materials and needs. The quiet mystery surrounding these high-temperature kilns comes from the balance between simplicity and sophistication. The materials were basic: clay walls, mud brick supports, and simple fuel. Yet the results stable. Sustained high heat required coordinated knowledge of physics, even if not articulated scientifically. Craftsmen gained this knowledge through observation, trial, error, and generational transmission. Their skills were practical rather than theoretical, rooted in experience with fire, airflow, and the transformation of materials. Some kiln structures show signs of repair and modification. Cracks in the clay lining were patched with fresh layers. Vent openings were enlarged or adjusted. Fire tunnels were reinforced. These changes reflect continuous adaptation based on performance. Kiln workers evaluated how each firing changed the structure and responded accordingly. The discovery of kiln sites also reveals the organization of ancient industry. Pottery and faience workshops were often located at the outskirts of settlements to keep smoke and heat away from homes. They were positioned near fuel sources and water access. Their placement demonstrates that kiln firing was a recognized part of community planning, integrated into daily economic life. Despite their technological significance, the kilns lack inscriptions or written records describing their operation. The knowledge lived in the hands and memory of craftsmen. The objects they fired, tiles, cups, amulets, jars, survive in abundance, but the techniques behind them must be reconstructed from physical evidence. The ancient blast furnace kilns show that high heat production existed long before formal metallurgy advanced. While the kilns did not melt metals, they created the temperatures necessary for glaze formation, durable ceramics, and complex inlays. This mastery of heat was essential for Egypt's artistic and industrial achievements, from brightly colored faience to robust storage jars used in temples and households. Standing in front of the excavated kilns today, they appear simple, low circular pits, thick clay walls, and broken fragments scattered nearby. But the surfaces inside, burned to deep red or glassy black, reveal the intensity of the fires once maintained within them. They remind us that ancient technology was often built from ordinary materials shaped by extraordinary knowledge. These kilns were the engines behind much of Egypt's craft production. Their heat transformed raw earth into vessels, glazes, and objects that supported daily life, religious practice, and royal ceremonies. In the steady glow of their fires, we see the quiet ingenuity of a civilization that learned to control heat long before science defined it, creating tools, containers, and art through a deep understanding of fire and the materials it transforms.